Chapter 1, Sack of King's Landing. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Behold, your grace, Tywin Lannister declared, gesturing to the three corpses. Tokens of my loyalty. Eddard wrinkled his nose involuntarily. Of course, the children were a threat to the throne. As they grew older, they could seek vengeance on the north. Thus, he fully approved of the act in principle. Yet the method was utterly grotesque. This was not his plan. Before reaching the city, he had spoken to Roose Bolton and ordered a man named Locke to lead 5 Bolton men into the princess's chambers ahead of time. He specifically instructed swift and painless deaths, leaving Princess Elia for last. That way, the noble hero, Ned Stark, could storm the room with his men and rescue her. As for the 5 Bolton men expecting a reward under Locke's leadership, they would be executed on the spot. This would preserve, even bolster, the honorable Eddard Stark image he had meticulously built for years. As a reward to House Bolton, he had promised the betrothal of a Stark daughter to the young Domeric, who was only 2 years old. It was a brilliant plan. He would rid himself of threats to the north, be hailed as a hero for saving the traumatized Elia, gain the gratitude of Dorne, and secure the allegiance of the second most powerful northern house, the Boltons, solidifying House Stark's rule. He would achieve in one stroke what his father, Rickard Stark, had spent a lifetime pursuing. Tywin Lannister was a disgusting man, he decided. Yes, Ned had planned something similar, but his methods were quick and humane. He would never have imagined carrying it out in such a vile way. Tywin's execution of the plan was horrifying, earning the Lannisters both fear and hatred. A certain degree of fear was necessary, of course, but too much hatred would eventually come back to bite you. Ned looked forward to that day, relishing the thought of plundering the lion's corpse for all it was worth. But for now, that was not the issue. Ned had to maintain the honorable image he had worked so hard to cultivate. He couldn't witness such a scene and still claim to be honorable. This is murder, he shouted. Robert, you cannot stand by and let this happen. They were dragon spawn, Ned Robert retorted. They burned your father and strangled your brother here. Ah, his father. A fool who thought himself greater than he was, yet his burning was indeed tragic. Rickard Stark had worked tirelessly to strengthen the north. As for his brother Brandon's strangulation, honestly, Aerys had done the north a great favor. The bastard would have been a disastrous Lord of Winterfell, incapable of anything beyond fighting and fornicating. In truth, Robert was much the same, but his deficiencies worked in Eddard's favor. In the future, he would exploit his friend's idiocy to further strengthen the north. Children are innocent of their parents' crimes, he said, meeting Robert's gaze. How can you claim to be different from the Targaryens after approving such murders? Robert immediately rose from his seat, clearly agitated. Ned knew he had struck a nerve, but it didn't matter, Jon Arryn would soon step in. The old man never failed to mediate. Right on cue, Jon Arryn sprang to his feet, positioning himself between Ned and Robert. Mixing gentle and firm words, he attempted to calm them both. But Ned paid him no heed, he didn't need to be calmed. He continued glaring at Robert for a few more moments but didn't prolong his anger. Fighting with Robert too much wasn't in his interest, he didn't want to accidentally cross the point of no return. This fool had to be exploited to the bone. Once he finished his business in Dorne, he would return to the city and reconcile with Robert under a convenient pretext. Such a reconciliation would allow him to extract even more concessions for the north. Every move Ned made was calculated to kill several birds with one stone. I cannot condone this, he finally declared. Lord Bolton, gather your men. We are leaving this cursed city. He strode toward the door. After finishing his business in Dorne, he would return to the city to claim his rewards. His mind was already brimming with ideas. Eddard would accomplish what his ancestors could not, elevating the north to unprecedented power. First, he would turn to Storm's End, breaking the siege and forging connections with a few Reach Lords. Once that was done, he would gather a skilled group of knights and head to the Tower of Joy. He hadn't decided what to do with Lyanna yet. The foolish girl seemed unlikely to serve as a useful pawn, probably still weeping for Rhaegar. Now that he thought about it, killing her might be the more logical choice. It would be an excellent excuse to mend relations with Robert. The she-wolf had caused nothing but trouble for House Stark with her actions in life. Perhaps her corpse could be of some use. After the Tower of Joy, he would head to Starfall to see his old flame, Ashara Dayne. She would undoubtedly be devastated by the loss of her brother in such a brutal event, but Eddard could offer her some warm consolation. After all, as an honorable man following the knightly code, he couldn't ignore a weeping woman. He was fully aware that he was married to Catelyn Tully and had no intention of replacing her with Ashara. The marriage was one of his father's rare clever moves, and the Tully alliance was crucial to his plans for strengthening the North. Still, Catelyn was dreadfully dull in bed, lying there like the fish on her family's sigil. Eddard hoped this would change in time, otherwise, he might need to visit his great lost love from Harrenhal a few more times. Ashara wanted to marry him, but given her dramatic nature, she might settle for being his mistress. After all, a meddling Trout Lord shouldn't stand between him and the love of his life. Such thoughts might seem arrogant from the outside, but Ned knew Ashara well enough from the Harrenhal tourney. She was deeply passionate about what she claimed as hers, especially when she lost it. The Honorable Ned Stark abandoning his honor for her would thrill her, making her feel uniquely special. Eddard Stark was, without a doubt, a two-faced and terrible man, and he was fully aware of it. Those who called him honorable would be shocked and flee if they knew what went on in his mind. But since no such danger existed, it didn't matter. Ned Stark wasn't selfish. Every action he took was for a stronger North. Notes. I originally intended this fanfic to be a one-shot, but I might continue it depending on the feedback I receive. Wishing everyone an enjoyable read. Chapter 2, Tower of Joy. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Ned gazed at the sight before him. A tower, standing in the middle of the desert, far from civilization. The heat was unbearable, and the place was likely far from hygienic. Rhaegar had left his sister here, pregnant and defenseless, with only 3 Kingsguard to protect her, probably without even a maester. And then he had the audacity to call this place the Tower of Joy. If irony had a name, it was Rhaegar Targaryen. The man was undoubtedly as mad as his father. Perhaps Robert had done the realm a favor by killing that prophecy-obsessed fool. What kind of king would Rhaegar have been? Ned thought about it for a moment. Rhaegar wouldn't have been a drunk, whoring king like Robert. But that didn't mean he'd have been a better ruler. Most likely, he'd have had an epiphany while reading one of his prophetic books from As High, realizing, the prince that was promised must be the children I have with Cersei. Just as he had discarded Elia Martell, he would have done the same to Lyanna, plunging the realm into yet another civil war. What Ned appreciated about Robert was his self-awareness. Robert knew exactly what he was, a warrior, not a king. He didn't try to make excuses or pretend otherwise. He also didn't waste time trying to fix it. Instead, he dumped all the responsibilities on Jon Arryn's shoulders and returned to his drinking and whoring. Ned had never expected Robert to be a good king. But at the very least, he wouldn't burn the heir and lord of a major house or kidnap another lord's daughter, who also happened to be betrothed to a different paramount lord. That kind of madness would throw the realm into chaos. Robert's decision to offload all his responsibilities onto the council might ironically have made him a more peaceful ruler than half the Targaryen kings combined. Ned turned to look behind him. 6 men had come with him, forming the famed number 7 so beloved by the Andals. Of course, he hadn't told them about the 3 Cranogmen archers secretly following them. Only Howland Reed and Ned himself were aware of their presence. Once he was rid of the 5 fools he had brought, the archers would take over. The 5 idiots, handpicked for this mission, were immensely proud to have been chosen by the Warden of the North for such an important task. But, well, they were all going to die here anyway, so it hardly mattered. Ethan Glover was one of the fools who had ridden to King's Landing with his brother, as if they could actually achieve something. If the man had even a shred of common sense, he'd have realized how this would end. After being released from the dungeons, Ethan had insisted on coming along to rescue Lyanna. Ned allowed it. Once this idiot was dead, it would prevent any inheritance disputes or civil wars among the Glovers. A headache solved before it began. Theoval was a childhood friend of Ned's older brother. Like Brandon, he enjoyed wine and women a little too much. He had just begun ruling but was already causing problems. Ned had no desire to deal with mountain clan disputes during his tenure as Warden of the North. Once Theo was dead, his much more competent brother would inherit Martin Castle. Ned had to admit this one gave him a pang of guilt. The Castles were a loyal house, and Martin had served Winterfell faithfully for decades. But the man was aging and slowing down, yet stubbornly refused to give up his position as Master-at-Arms. If Ned gave the role to his younger and more capable son, Jory, the boy would never accept it out of respect for his father. A slow Master-at-Arms was a liability. Martin had to go. Mark Ryswell was a proven swordsman and tactician. And that was precisely why he had to die. Ned wasn't blind to the alliance between House Ryswell and the Boltons. If a Bolton rebellion ever arose, Mark Ryswell would be a dangerous asset for them. Better to remove that piece from the board now. And finally, William Dustin. His death would be a significant boon for Ned. With no heirs left, the Dustin line would end, leaving Barrowton ripe for the taking by House Stark. As Ned climbed the steps to the tower, he saw the three Kingsguard standing proudly. "I looked for you at the Trident," he called out to them. "We were not there," Hightower replied. "If we had been, your usurper would be dead," Oswell Went added. Ned stared at them incredulously. Were these fools seriously convincing themselves of that? One of them was an old man, and the other wasn't particularly skilled. At most, he was slightly better than Ned. If they had been at the Trident, Robert would have crushed them in minutes. When King's Landing fell, Ned said, "Sir Jaime killed your king with a golden sword. I wondered where you were." "Far away," said Hightower, "or Aerys would still sit the Iron Throne, and your false brother would burn in the seven hells." Ned barely held back a laugh. The man was about to die, yet he was still busy sucking up to Aerys. "I marched on Storm's End to lift the siege," Ned continued. "The Tyrells and Redwynes lowered their banners, and their knights bent the knee. I expected to find you among them." Ned knew full well these three fools would never have bent the knee. Still, he spoke these words as a final gesture of mercy, a way to hint that the fight for House Targaryen was already lost. "Our knees do not bend easily," Hightower said. Empty words, Ned thought. "Sir Willem D'Ary fled to Dragonstone with Prince Viserys," he said. "I thought you might have sailed with him." "Sir Willem is an honorable man," Oswell replied. "But he is no Kingsguard." "A Kingsguard does not flee," Hightower affirmed. Ned nearly burst out laughing. "Your king is dead, and you weren't there. Your prince is dead, and you weren't there. Your princess was raped, her children butchered, and you weren't there. I don't know what you call that, but I'd call it fleeing." Sir Arthur Dayne donned his helm. "We swore a vow," he said. "We swore a vow." Ned wondered how many times Arthur had repeated that to himself. Ned might play at being an honorable man, but no vow could ever bind him to guard a rapist. If Ned had been there, he'd have drawn his sword and killed Aerys himself. The swords were drawn, and the fight began. Ned stayed back, focusing on defending himself. The five fools he had brought with him got the honorable deaths they craved. Howland Reed was injured, but still alive. Ned was relieved to see his friend breathing but had no time to help. He was left face to face with Arthur Dayne. Eddard Stark was no match for Arthur Dayne in a fair fight. If it had come down to skill alone, Ned would already be a dead man, and all his plans for the North would end here. But fortunately, Ned had planned ahead. He raised two fingers and pointed at Arthur Dayne, signaling the archers. A volley of arrows flew through the air, each striking true. Howland wasn't exaggerating about their skill, Ned thought. He raised his hand to signal them to stop, then picked up Dawn, the famous sword of House Dayne, and pointed its tip at the dying Kingsguard. "Don't worry, Arthur," he said before delivering the final blow. "I'll comfort your sister in your absence." Afterward, Ned checked on Howland Reed. Seeing that his friend's injuries weren't severe, he ordered the archers to tend to him while he made his way up the tower alone. He had already decided. Lyanna had to die. She wasn't fit to be a pawn. Even after causing their fathers' and brothers' deaths, she would still be the same shameless woman she always had been. Entering the tower's top room, he was greeted by a strange smell. Hallucinogenic incense, no doubt. "I shouldn't linger here," he thought as he approached the bed. "Ned." Lyanna's weak voice called out. "Is it really you?" "Ha," Ned thought, glancing at the blood-soaked bed. Looks like she's about to die anyway. Saves me the trouble. Yes, it's me, Lyanna, he replied in a monotone. Lyanna Stark. A woman who wanted all the privileges of being born a Stark but none of the responsibilities. While the North struggled to survive winter, with women, children, and elders dying from cold and starvation, their father had sought to strengthen their house with a southern alliance. A marriage to Robert Baratheon. But Lyanna had thought herself above such duties. And for what? She had traded the title of Lady Baratheon for Rhaegar's second wife. Or rather, his concubine. A second wife was no better than a mistress, just a fancier title. Brother, she whispered. Promise me. Promise you what? Ned wondered, then noticed the cradle beside her bed. So, you had a child. Robert will kill him, Lyanna pleaded. He probably will if I bring the boy to him, Ned thought. But watching my nephew die isn't something I'd enjoy. Best to throw him from the tower now. Rhaegar named him Aegon, Lyanna said. Promise me, Ned. Protect him. Ned raised an eyebrow. Rhaegar already had a son named Aegon, yet he had given this child the same name. Poor Elia Martell and her children. Rhaegar had already discarded them. This explained why they hadn't been protected by the Kingsguard, Ned thought. Promise me, Ned, Lyanna repeated. Ned sighed. Even now, after all she'd done, Lyanna was looking to him to clean up her mess. Fine, he said dismissively. I promise. Lyanna smiled at that, then died. Ned picked up a pillow, ready to send his newborn nephew to join his mother. But then the baby opened his eyes. Black hair. Grey eyes. The Stark features were unmistakable. A smile crossed Ned's face. A brilliant idea had just struck him. Notes. As you may, or may not, know, my main focus right now isn't this fanfic but another series. I initially intended this to be a shorter one-shot, but a few readers I've been in touch with told me they absolutely loved the first chapter of For a Stronger North and wanted more. So, I went ahead and wrote a second chapter. Depending on the interest it generates, I might decide to turn this into an ongoing series rather than a one-shot. For now, I'm just writing it for fun. The series I'm currently focusing on main series. https://archiveoforon.org/works/608661644/chapters/155468629. Chapter 3, Starfall. Chapter text. Ned looked at the castle before him. Starfall. They had traveled a long way to get here, crossing the desert first, then passing through lemon orchards. Carrying Lyanna's coffin hadn't made the journey any easier. But in the end, the Honorable Eddard Stark couldn't leave his sister's body in the middle of the desert. There should have been a similar code of honor for the other corpses, but it wasn't possible for Eddard to carry them. After all, they were only two people traveling. So, he had placed the bodies at a certain point and respectfully laid them to rest, then collapsed the tower on top of them. It was interesting how easy it was to destroy the tower. Rhaegar clearly hadn't paid much attention to the strength of the structure he had chosen for his sister's resting place. His only concern had been secrecy, and since the Tower of Joy served that purpose, the rest didn't matter. He approached the red gates of Starfall. Stop! Who seeks entry to Starfall? Shouted the guard at the castle gate. Lord Eddard Stark and his companion Howland Reed seek entry to Starfall, Howland shouted in reply. The guard was clearly stunned by what he had heard. Do you have any proof? Without hesitation, Ned unsheathed House Stark's sword, Ice, raising it and showing it to the guard. Valyrian swords were rare in Westeros, found only among the nobility, and there were only a few as large as Ice in the entire world. Welcome to Starfall, Lord Stark, the guard said immediately. Please wait. We will summon Lord Alaric. After a nod of approval from Ned, he waited. Coming to this castle was a huge risk. He had killed the castle lord's brother, impregnated his sister, and then broken the marriage promise he had made by marrying someone else. The man had every reason to execute him, but this was a risk worth taking. He had brought Rhaegar and Lyanna's bastard with him, though, according to the marriage documents he wasn't a bastard, and had plans for him. Still, these plans required risk. That's why Ned gambled on the information that Lord Alaric Dane was one of the honourable types, hoping Ashura might stop him if Alaric decided to execute him. "Lord Stark," a voice called, and Ned looked up. The man standing on the castle's ramparts, looking down at him, was undoubtedly a Dane, though not as handsome as Arthur. He had a more serious expression. Lord Dane. Ned greeted him with a nod. "We seek entry to your castle. We also have important news to deliver." The man continued to look down at him. "How many are you?" "Just the two of us," Ned replied. The archers had sworn to silence and were left behind. They would return to their homeland alone. This decision showed just how risky Ned was truly taking, but in the legendary tale where Arthur Dane was slain, there was no room for 3 archers, and once inside the castle, if Lord Dane decided to execute Ned, the archers wouldn't be able to save anyone. They were useless. Lord Dane stared at him a little longer, then sighed and nodded, ordering his guards to escort Lord Stark into the castle. "Please be our guest, Lord Stark." Muttering a few words of thanks, Ned followed the guards. Soon, they led him to the main hall. The offer of bread and salt was a great relief. Breaking the guest rite was something even Tywin Lannister would hesitate to do. Finally, as he entered the main hall, Lord Alaric Dane was standing on a high dais, looking at him. Around him were a few guards, a maester, and a woman. Ashura. Ned stared at Ashura for a while. But not for too long. After all, the brother of the woman he loved had killed her brother, Arthur, and now he had to be in a sorrowful and embarrassed state. He turned his head in shame. "Lord Dane," he said after a few silent coughs. He drew Dane's famous sword, Dawn, from its scabbard and placed it at the Lord's feet. "I regret to inform you that your brother Arthur died in battle, with honor." Ned looked down at the sword again. He was frustrated. Really frustrated. If he had taken Dawn for House Stark, it would have been a huge prize. He imagined carving wolf patterns into the scabbard and renaming it Frost. His grandchildren, the future lords of Winterfell, would come to his grave and thank him for such a glorious legacy. But sadly, this wasn't an option. If he took Dawn, it would leave a huge stain on the Honorable Eddard Stark name, and his plans with Lyanna's child would be harder to realize. Ice was the family's Valyrian sword, and especially due to its unique size, it was a source of pride. But, honestly, it wasn't very functional. Ned was too small to use it in battle. In fact, to wield such a sword, you'd have to be a giant like Gregor Clegane. His ancestors had only used ice for ceremonial purposes, or as decoration on their backs. Eddard had briefly considered melting the sword down and forging 2 separate Valyrian blades, one for the Lord of Winterfell and one for his heir. But he quickly dismissed the idea when he realized how costly it would be, and because melting down an ancestral sword would cause a massive outcry. Lord Dane stared at the sword for a while. He lifted it and checked if it was truly Dawn. Ashura, standing by, began to sob quietly. If Ned were to say his heart didn't ache, it would be a great lie. The affection he had for her was one of the rare sincere moments that didn't imitate anything. "Who killed him?" Lord Dane asked. Ned sighed deeply. "Here it begins. Old gods, help me." "I did," he announced after a pause. If he had blamed one of the slain Kingsguard members, his life would be safe, but he had no intention of letting anyone else take credit for defeating Arthur Dane in single combat. He wasn't lying, he had killed the man himself. "How did he die?" Alaric Dane asked, his voice harsh. Ned sighed again. He had been shot with arrows, but that wasn't a story they would like. "But don't worry, I've written you a great story. I came to the Tower of Joy to find my sister," he began. "Drold Hightower, Oswell went, and your brother Arthur were there. I tried to convince them I would never harm my sister, but they wouldn't listen. 'We have an oath,' they said." "Fool! Fool! Damn him!" Ashura cried. Lord Dane said nothing, only motioning for Ned to continue. "We fought. In the end, only Arthur, Howland, and I were left. Howland was injured and couldn't help me." Howland Reed nodded in confirmation and showed the wound on his shoulder. "Arthur and I fought one-on-one. He defeated me in no time, and my sword fell from my hand." The Danes looked at Ned in astonishment. "If Arthur took your sword, how are you still alive?" Alaric Dane asked. Friend, if you hadn't asked that question, I would have been truly disappointed. You'll love the story you're about to hear. While I was kneeling, awaiting death, I realized Arthur, That's enough, Stark. Just tell us. Lord Dane shouted. The room held its breath. He couldn't raise his sword. What? A voice exclaimed from everyone in the room. What do you mean he couldn't lift his sword? Ashura asked. I mean exactly what I said, my lady. Your brother Arthur couldn't lift your ancestral sword, Dawn. The tip of the sword was buried in the ground. Despite gripping it with both hands and using all his strength, he couldn't lift it. He was in shock. Everyone in the room stared in disbelief. Even the guards stood silently for a few minutes. This. I understand, Alaric Dane said with tears in his eyes. After helping Arthur with dishonorable deeds, Dawn rejected him when he tried to kill a man as honorable as you. It decided he was not worthy to wield it. Arthur was no longer the sword of the morning. Man, you really finished the story in an amazing way. So how did he die? Alaric Dane asked more calmly. I took advantage of the situation, Ned announced. I charged at Arthur and knocked him down with all my strength. Your brother, shocked by the moment, fell to the ground and dropped his sword. I immediately took Dawn from the ground and, with one last move, killed your brother. The room was silent. Lord, if you don't believe me, Ned began. There's no need, Lord Stark, Alaric Dane said. No one in Westeros doubts your honor. Ah, Lord Stark, the old Maester asked. Can you tell me what happened to your sister? I don't see her with you. Ned wondered why he was asking about Lyanna. Shouldn't he be asking about his own Arthur? My sister is dead, he announced with a sorrowful voice. Her body is in the coffin I brought with me. Even the guards looked at Ned with sad eyes. I see. My condolences, Alaric Dane said with a sorrowful voice. What about my brother's body? Unfortunately, I couldn't bring it, Ned said. I could barely carry Lyanna. After burying them properly, I collapsed the tower on top of them so their bodies wouldn't be disrespected by ravens and vultures. Alaric Dane nodded in acknowledgement, but the Maester objected. That is not right, my lord. Your brother Arthur should be buried in Starfall, alongside his family. Arthur is not worthy of being buried in Starfall, Alaric Dane said firmly. He was my brother, and I loved him, but Dawn rejected him. He was no longer worthy of his name or his title. Let his body remain there. Ned thought, I didn't expect this to end like this. Sorry, Arthur. Then what about the baby? Ashura asked. Where did that child come from? Ned sighed. Here it comes. That child is my bastard, Ned stammered, avoiding looking at Ashura. Ashura raised an eyebrow, then looked at Ned, then at the child, then back at her brother. Her gaze softened as Alaric gave her a confirming nod. All guards, leave the room immediately, Alaric announced. Maester, you too. But, my lord. This is an order, Lord Dane shouted. Soon, all the guards and the Maester left the room. Now, only Ned, Howland, Alaric, Ashura, and the baby were left. Damn it, Ned, Ashura said, covering her face with her hands. Really, you're terrible at lying. Believe me, love, you have no idea. I'm not lying, Ashura, Ned stammered. That child is truly my bastard. Is it? Ashura asked, her voice laced with sarcasm. Then who is the mother? I was stressed during the war and visited a prostitute. Please, don't insult us, Lord Stark, Alaric said, gesturing to the baby. This child is newly born. How did you bring it with you? Or did you take it to the tower? Of course not, Ned immediately objected. I simply picked it up in a village along the way. Ned, Ashura interrupted. Is that child Lyanna's? Damn, Ned thought. How did you catch my obvious lie? Please, Ashura, he said, his voice pleading. I swore to protect my sister's child. Don't worry, Lord Stark, Alaric Dane immediately said. This secret will never leave this room. But my sister is right. Your lie is a little too obvious. You really are terrible at lying. Ned took a deep breath. So what should we do, he said, feeling defeated. How do I protect my nephew? Ashura stepped down from the dais. She took the child into her arms and, after inspecting him for a moment, looked at Ned. Tell them that this bastard is my child. Say that I gave birth to your bastard, she said with a slight smile. It's not something I haven't already done. I can't put that burden on you, Ashura. Ned immediately protested. I've already sinned so much against you. You don't deserve more of my problems, he added, his voice filled with sorrow. If you want to protect the child, this story will be the best option, Alaric said. We can take care of him here if you wish. Hell no, Ned thought. I'm not foolish enough to leave him with Doran Martell. This child will give me a huge advantage in the future. I can't accept this, he said, his voice firm. The child will grow up in Winterfell. Very well, I understand, Alaric said with a sigh. My guards are loyal. I will make sure they swear an oath of silence. As for the Maester, well, he was old anyway. We'll need a new one. Ned opened his mouth to protest, but Ashura quickly grabbed his arm. No problem, Ned. Ashura, Ned paused dramatically, then continued, I'm so sorry, Elia and the children. It wasn't your fault, Lord Stark, Alaric Dane immediately said. Everyone in Dorne knows how you stood up to the king, seeking justice for Elia and the children. Nice, Ned thought. I spent a fortune getting bards and merchants to spread this news, and it seems like every penny was well spent. This isn't important right now, Ned, Ashura said with a sad smile. Come, let me show you my daughter. For the first time since entering the hall, Ned Stark smiled genuinely. I have a daughter, a little girl. If she's as beautiful as her mother, I'll have a hard time keeping the men away from her. As Ned Stark walked out of the hall with Ashura, he was quite satisfied with his situation. The roots of his grand plan had been perfectly planted. Chapter 4, Ashura Dane. Chapter text. Ashura woke up in the arms of the man she loved. She had slept with the man who killed her brother, but she wasn't complaining. She wasn't angry, sad, or regretful. If there was one thing she regretted, it was having to work for 3 days to make it happen. Ned was leaving tomorrow. Her time with her silent wolf was painfully limited. She glanced at her naked body under the covers. Her skin was marked with bruises and bite marks everywhere, especially between her thighs. Ashura knew she'd have trouble walking today. Her sweet silent wolf had unleashed all the pent-up anger he'd carried through the war on her body, but Ashura was very pleased. It had been a magnificent night. And he had taken his fair share of damage, too. Ned's body was just as battered, covered in bruises, bites, and scratches. His back, in particular, looked like it had been mauled by a wild animal. She gently stroked her stomach. They had been together multiple times last night. Ashura wanted another child, a sibling for Illyria and an heir for Starfall. Ashura had successfully hidden Illyria by passing her off as her sister, sparing the child the stigma of bastardy. Alaric was infertile, he couldn't father children, so the Dane bloodline would continue through Ashura. She had made it clear to Alaric that she would never marry anyone but Ned, nor would she take any other lover or bear anyone else's children. She had told him this with unwavering resolve. After much deliberation, Alaric Dane had agreed. His infertility was a closely guarded family secret. Coincidentally, Lonna Blackmont, the eldest daughter of the Blackmonts and their mother's cousin, was similarly infertile. She was not an heir to her family's legacy, nor did she have any prospects for marriage. Her future seemed bleak. Alaric would marry her, ensuring that he wouldn't ruin the life of a woman capable of bearing children. Pessimistic and resigned to her fate, Lonna would become the Lady of Dane. Ned and Ashura's children would be claimed as theirs and declared the heirs of Starfall. Ashura's children would not grow up carrying the stain of bastardy. It was a perfect trade-off, leaving everyone happy. Ashura looked fondly at the man sleeping beside her. She had cried a lot when she learned he had killed her brother Arthur, but not for Arthur. Why would she cry for that fool? No, her tears were for the seemingly impossible future they could have together. Ned had married another, and he had killed her brother. But when he explained how Arthur had died, hope was reignited. That idiot had been rejected by their ancestral sword, Dorne. Ashura had made sure everyone in Starfall knew the story, ensuring no one could accuse her of being a whore who lay with the man who killed her brother. She got out of bed slowly, put on her nightgown, and left the room. Walking through the corridor, she noticed the servants looking at her, but she held her head high, unashamed. Thinking back to the screams she let out while being taken by Ned, she smiled faintly. It was no secret what had happened last night. She raised her head proudly. Yes, I am that woman, she thought. Eddard Stark, the man who defied a king for honor and duty, shattered his own ideology for me. Because I am his, and he is mine. Let everyone know. Especially that Tully whore. She made her way to the nursery to check on her daughter Illyria and her supposed son Jon. Jon was a quiet baby, but even as a newborn, he already showed signs that he would grow up to be the spitting image of his uncle, Ned Stark. Ashura often imagined that if she and Ned had a son, he would look just like Jon. She stroked her stomach again and prayed to the gods for a child. Entering the nursery, she closed the door tightly behind her. A little girl stood by Jon Snow's cradle, playing happily with her brother. Rhaenys, Ashura whispered. You shouldn't be here. Your Uncle Ned will wake soon, and he mustn't see you. Rhaenys looked up at her Aunt Ashura. Can't I stay a little longer, she asked in a sad voice. Mana is gone, Egg is gone, and now Maker is leaving too. Maker? Ashura thought. Rhaegar's preemptive naming of a potential son with Lyanna as Aegon had infuriated her because she knew exactly what it meant. That bastard abandoned Elia and her children. He kept ranting about the dragon having 3 heads and decided all the heads must come from Lyanna. If he had won the war, he would have divorced Elia, cast her children aside, and acknowledged only the pups of the she-wolf. After discussing it with Ned, they had decided to change the Targaryen name given to Jon. At Ashura's suggestion, Jon Snow's true name became Maker. The truth that he had been named Aegon remained a secret. If the Martells ever learned of it, they would undoubtedly lose their minds, especially Oberyn. Don't worry, dear, Ashura said, stroking Rhaenys's face. This separation is only temporary. One day, you'll see him again. Can't you convince Uncle Ned? Rhaenys pleaded. He's my brother, and he should stay with me. Your Uncle Ned doesn't know you're alive, sweetheart, Ashura explained. And he mustn't learn the truth. Knowing this would endanger his life. Ashura hadn't told Ned that Rhaenys was alive. The poor silent wolf was already breaking his vows to protect Jon and hold Ashura in his arms. It tore at his sense of honor, putting him in constant turmoil. Ashura didn't want to burden him any further. She would tell him about Rhaenys one day, but not yet. Rhaenys asked, Aunt Ashura, I heard your voice while walking in the corridor yesterday. Uncle Ned doesn't hurt you, does he? Ashura's face turned as red as a tomato. Oh my god. Oh my god. I'd forgotten about Rhaenys being there. Forgive me, Elia, I'm not a good aunt for your daughter. The thing we did with Uncle Ned. Ashura began, you'll understand when you grow up, but know that he never hurt me. After taking a moment to calm herself, she looked at the child again. Don't worry, Rhaenys, she reassured the child. Uncle Ned will protect Maker, take care of him, and you'll see him again later, I promise. Rhaenys, with tears in her eyes, nodded in approval and left the room to return to her hiding place in the castle. Ashura would see her again later. After checking on the child for a while, Ashura returned to the room. She saw Ned putting on his clothes. Good morning, my love, she said, kissing him on the lips. Ashura. Eddard murmured. You. What happened? Ashura asked with a playful smile. Didn't you like last night? What? By the gods, last night. Ned began to protest immediately. Ashura put her finger on Ned's lips. If you didn't like last night. She continued, removing her nightgown in a single smooth motion, revealing her naked body. Maybe you should give your lover another chance. Ned watched Ashura's body passionately and hungrily, but then, taking a deep breath, he controlled himself. I have things to do today, he said, finally covering her with his cloak. Also, this. What we did. If you're going to tell me you're married, Ned, Ashura frowned. I already know about that. Eddard sighed deeply. I've dishonored you over and over. I've broken the vow I gave you in marriage. I've put a bastard in your womb. Oh, my love, Ashura thought. I would let you dishonor me hundreds of times more. It was my choice, she immediately declared, holding Ned's hand. And it was your choice too, Ned. It wasn't a wrong decision we made while drunk, I don't regret a single second of it. She reached for him and kissed him passionately. Ned responded with the same passion. Damn you, woman, he said finally. You're making me a completely different man. I know, Ashura confirmed with a smile. Come to my room tonight. Ned paused thoughtfully for a minute, then nodded in agreement and left the room. Ashura watched the man she loved walk away. In the past, she would have felt immense shame at being with a married or engaged man, but not with Ned. Her connection with him was written in fate. It was the will of the gods, and there was only one person standing between them and a life of happiness together. Once that one person was gone, Ashura and Ned could be as they were meant to be. Caitlin Tully. She returned to her room, opened the hidden compartment in the wall, and took out the book. It was a book Oberyn had given her a long time ago. Ashura had never thought it would come in handy. She sat down, opened the book, and began to read eagerly, a twisted smile on her face. Conium, also known as hemlock, is an extremely deadly poison. When grating it, gloves must be worn at all times, and never. Chapter 5, Back to King's Landing. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. My lord, our ship will reach King's Landing shortly. Ned nodded in acknowledgement. He climbed the stairs to the deck and scanned the view ahead. Ah, King's Landing. What a filthy city. Hey, Howland, he said, turning to his companion. Yes, my lord. Is the bite mark on my lip still visible? Howland chuckled mockingly. It's hardly noticeable unless someone looks closely. Does it still hurt? Ned touched his lip with his hand. A little. He sighed. The woman he loved had been wild when taking what she desired. Before he left Starfall, she made sure to leave a mark on his lip. As if I didn't already have enough marks on my body. Ashura Dayne, what an extraordinary woman she was. Ned recalled the first time he danced with her at the tourney of Harrenhal. It was during the first night of the tourney. Nearly all the highborn families of the realm were present, and Ned saw a significant opportunity in this gathering. The quiet wolf retreated to his corner and observed the proceedings with great attention. Who was dancing with whom? Who had potential alliances? Which lords were forging bonds, and which were growing apart? Ned carefully noted everything, memorizing it in case it proved useful later. His eyes lingered especially on the royal table, but, of course, not enough to draw the Mad King's attention. But his foolish brother Brandon had misinterpreted his glances toward the royal table. Brandon thought Ned was watching Ashura Dayne. He grabbed Ned's arm, urging him to ask her to dance, but Ned shrugged him off. He had already chosen his bride, Caitlin Tully. After the tourney, Brandon, who loved hunting and riding, would suffer a tragic accident and lose his life. The accident had been carefully orchestrated, no one would suspect it was an assassination. And even if they did, Ned would never make the list of suspects. Who would believe that Honorable Eddard Stark would commit fratricide to become Lord of Winterfell? Even if Ned confessed aloud, they'd probably think he was joking. With Brandon gone, Eddard Stark would naturally take his place. He would become the heir to Winterfell. He would marry Caitlin Tully. Ned's dream was to make the North a strong and stable kingdom, and that was impossible with Brandon, who treated the responsibilities of being heir so lightly. Anyway, when Brandon tried to push him toward Ashura, Ned had played the part of the shy second son and refused to approach her. He thought his brother would soon get bored and give up. But no, Brandon personally approached Ashura and asked her to dance with Ned. During the dance, Ned made no attempt to charm Ashura. There were two reasons for this. First, his acting skills were limited to playing the role of Honorable Eddard Stark. He lacked the charisma to woo women. Second, though Ashura Dayne was undoubtedly beautiful, an alliance with House Dayne held no strategic value for him. Thus, Eddard Stark, the quiet wolf, continued his act as a shy young man and avoided initiating any conversation during the dance. He expected Ashura to grow bored of him quickly. Perhaps, like so many other foolish women, she'd fall for Brandon, bear one of his bastards, and become another conquest for his brother to brag about. Ned didn't care. But things unfolded very differently. Ashura was a woman who had lived in the Red Keep, witnessed the Mad King burn people alive, and grown far too wise for the likes of Brandon. She saw through such trivial games. Ashura knew that sleeping with Brandon would gain her nothing but the label of Dornish whore. Though they didn't speak during the first dance, Ashura didn't let go of his hands. She wanted to keep dancing. During the second dance, they exchanged small questions and answers, and then Ned couldn't remember what happened or what they talked about. But they danced all night. In the days that followed, they occasionally met for walks. And before long, Honorable Eddard Stark found himself waking up in Ashura's bed. Their relationship became an open secret among everyone at Harrenhal. Brandon, Lyanna, Benjen, Robert, Jon Arryn, even the servants, knew about their affair. Everyone seemed happy for him. And Eddard Stark did something he thought he'd never do, he promised to marry Ashura. He had changed his plans for a woman. A woman. Of course, he justified the marriage with strategic reasons. Ashura was intelligent and understood southern politics. She could be a great help to him in the future. And, most importantly, when the rebellion against the Targaryens began, Ned wasn't naive. He understood why great houses married each other. His marriage to Ashura would weaken the Dornish faction. The Dornish forces, led by the Danes, were known for their spear-wielding warriors and their ability to form an impenetrable wall against armored knights. If the Targaryens lost them, they would be helpless against the Arryn, Bracken, Ryswell, and Dustin cavalry. Eddard Stark planned to marry Ashura, let Brandon marry Catelyn, and wait for his brother to sire a male heir. Considering how active Brandon was in such matters, this wouldn't take long. Once a healthy male child was guaranteed, Brandon would suffer an unfortunate accident. Eddard Stark, as the child's guardian, would rule the North in his nephew's stead. Brandon would never ruin the North with his recklessness. The Tully alliance would remain intact, and Eddard would wield the power necessary to strengthen the North, all while staying married to Ashura. Ned was a liar, but not a selfish one. His desire to become Lord of Winterfell wasn't for personal gain but to ensure he had the authority and resources to make the North a strong kingdom. Titles didn't matter to him, whether King in the North, Warden of the North, or Regent of a baby lord. What mattered was the power and influence to enact his vision. As for Brandon's son, Ned intended to raise him with the utmost care. If the boy proved himself worthy of being Lord of Winterfell, Ned would gladly hand over the seat and leave him a powerful kingdom. But if the boy turned out to be like Brandon, well, in the North, it wasn't uncommon for children to die young. Reflecting on the events now, Ned realized the irony of it all. If he hadn't danced with Ashura that night, Brandon would have died a few days later at the tourney. Without a doubt, the news of Lyanna's abduction would have reached him as Winterfell's heir. Perhaps Robert's rebellion would never have started. My Lord Howland's voice broke Ned's train of thought. We've arrived in the city. A Kingsguard is waiting for you. Ned nodded and disembarked. At the harbour, he was greeted by Sir Barristan Selmy. Lord Stark Barristan said with a respectful bow. His Majesty, Robert Baratheon, first of his name, invites you to the Red Keep as his guest. Ned signalled Howland to have Lyanna's casket loaded onto a cart. We'll need the casket for a dramatic entrance. He mounted his horse and began riding beside Sir Barristan. After a moment of hesitation, Barristan turned to Ned. Lord Stark, if I may ask an impertinent question. Ned was taken aback but nodded. Go ahead, sir. They say that when Sir Arthur faced you in battle, he could not raise his sword, that as a Dane, he was rejected by Dorne. Is it true? I know it's hard to believe, Ned said, but yes, it's true. I see. Barristan sighed, then paused before continuing. It's also said that you had a liaison with Lady Ashura while in Starfall. Is that true as well? Gods, I've been on the road for a week, and everyone already knows. Eddard Stark lowered his head in shame. Unfortunately, yes, that is also true. Barristan gave him a sympathetic look. Our vows are chains that bind us tightly. And, sometimes it's incredibly difficult to keep them. I understand. Thank you, Sir Ned replied. Adultery should have been a significant stain on the honor of a man like Eddard Stark. But with Ashura, it was different. Their tragic love story was well known, making people see Ned not as an unfaithful husband but as a man mourning a lost lover. Soon, they arrived at the entrance to the throne room. After a formal announcement of his presence, Eddard Stark entered. "Ah, Ned," a familiar voice boomed. Of course, it was Robert. "Your Majesty," Ned said, bowing. "Oh, stop that nonsense," Robert said, waving his hand. "Where's Lyanna? You didn't bring her?" Eddard Stark sighed sadly. "I'm afraid not, Robert. She's gone." For dramatic effect, Howland pushed the casket into the room. Robert fell to his knees before the casket, weeping openly. It wasn't proper for a king to be seen crying, so Jon Arryn quickly signaled for the throne room to be cleared. Only Ned and Robert remained. "How did she die?" Robert asked, his voice choked with tears. "Fever," Ned replied briefly. "Did she say anything about me before she died?" No, Ned shook his head. "She only wanted to go home." Robert nodded solemnly. The two sat in silence for a while. Then Ned decided it was time to begin his performance. "Robert, about last time," Ned sighed and looked at him. "I want to apologize for the way I left. I shouldn't have shouted. I was in shock over everything that happened." Robert interrupted him. "Forget it, Ned. I'm sorry too. I shouldn't have reacted that way. Besides, you've been through hell. How are you holding up, Ned?" Ned glanced at the casket, his eyes brimming with tears. "She's gone, Robert. And I couldn't save her." "No, Ned, you," Robert started to protest. "I'm the Lord of Winterfell," Ned interrupted. "The greatest lord in the north. All the armies of the north answer to me." He closed his eyes, struggling to control his anger. "And yet, with all that power, I couldn't even save my own sister. Damn it, Ned. If you feel guilty, what should I feel? I was her betrothed, the man she was supposed to marry, and I couldn't protect her either." Ned sighed and stared at the casket for a long moment. "Never again," he finally said. "My bloodline will never suffer what I've endured." Robert looked at him, confused. "How will you ensure that?" "I will rebuild the North," Ned said with newfound determination. "I'll make it stronger, a kingdom no one dares to challenge. Look, Robert." He pulled a piece of parchment from his pocket. "For this to work, I need some concessions and support. These requests may be difficult, but—" "Stop right there, Ned." Robert snatched the parchment without reading it and stuffed it into his own pocket. "No family suffered more than the Starks in this war. Whatever's on that list, I'll grant it. Jon also told me there's 4 million gold dragons in the treasury. I'll give you 300,000, no repayment, and don't argue." Ned stared at Robert in astonishment, unsure of what to say. Even he hadn't expected such generosity. "Robert. He stammered. "If you want to thank me," Robert said with a grin, slapping a hand on Ned's shoulder, "then get drunk with me tonight and tell me how you bedded that Dornish woman." Eddard Stark was both stunned and incredibly pleased. A new dawn was rising for House Stark and the North. Notes. Don't forget to leave a kudos. Chapter 6, Doran Martell. Summary. 2 years after the previous chapter. Chapter text. Doran let out a sigh as he gazed at the map of Westeros. To lift the gloomy atmosphere hanging over Dorne, he had announced a tournament in honor of his son, Quentyn Martell's 5th birthday. He had invited several houses from the Reach and the Crown lands, as well as a few others he thought might align with them in a Targaryen restoration. To avoid drawing too much attention, he had also extended invitations to the 3 leaders of the rebellion. However, he didn't expect any of them to attend. Robert Baratheon was enthusiastic about tournaments, but he wasn't foolish enough to travel to Dorne. If he did, no amount of security would ensure his safe and healthy return. He would likely face 10 assassination attempts before even stepping off the ship. Jon Arryn was known for his honor, but he had remained silent about the brutal murders of Elia and her children. Though the Dornish didn't hate him, they held him in contempt. If he attended, Doran would protect him. Killing the Hand of the King would not benefit Dorne politically, but attempts on his life were still inevitable. As for Eddard Stark, that was an entirely different matter. The Warden of the North had condemned the murders of Elia and her children and had ensured that Dornish nobles captured after the Battle of the Trident were returned home unharmed. He had also seen to it that the bodies of Uncle Luwin, Elia, and her children were treated with dignity and sent back to Dorne. No, Eddard Stark was deeply respected in Dorne. No one bore him any ill will. He could visit any house in Dorne freely, be treated with respect, and roam Sunspear without fear of assassination. In fact, Doran particularly hoped for his presence and had taken great care when drafting his invitation. Unsurprisingly, he received a polite refusal. The Starks were not a family inclined to leave the north, and Dorne was too far away. However, surprising events had followed. King Robert and Queen Cersei had welcomed a son, an heir, undoubtedly a cause for celebration. King Robert immediately announced a grand tournament, which came to be known among the people as the Heirs Tournament. He sent multiple letters urging his friend, Ned Stark, to come to King's Landing. Eddard Stark, of course, could not refuse the king's request and arrived in King's Landing a month before the tournament. At this point, Dorne received unexpected assistance from Jon Arryn. The Hand of the King wanted Dorne to return to the fold and actively participate in West AOC politics, using the Quentyn tournament as a starting point. He knew that Ned Stark would face no disrespect in Dorne, so he persuaded his foster son to attend the tournament. As the Warden of the North had limited time, he left King's Landing shortly afterward on the fastest ship to Sunspear. The entire trip would take 10 days by ship. He would be a guest in Dorne for 1 week during the Quentyn tournament. Similarly, he needed to return to King's Landing a week before the Heirs Tournament. In short, Doran had 1 week to establish good relations with the North and lay the groundwork for their potential alignment with the Targaryen restoration. Jon Arryn had done Dorne a great favor. Doran was a realist. He did not expect Eddard Stark to join the Targaryen cause, but he could establish friendly relations with the North as a foundation. And he knew exactly who would be most instrumental in laying this foundation, Ashara Dayne. Ashara Dayne hadn't initially planned to attend the Quentyn tournament. However, when Doran sent his fastest rider to Starfall with news of the attendees, she wasted no time. Bringing her daughter Illyria along, whom Doran knew to be her daughter, not her sister, Ashara boarded the fastest ship she could find and set sail for Sunspear. She had been in Sunspear for about 3 days now, grumbling impatiently. Her last union with Ned Stark had borne no fruit, and Doran remembered seeing her a year ago, clearly dissatisfied with her circumstances. According to Oberyn, Ashara had developed an obsession with the study of poisons over the past 2 years, an interest that bordered on dangerous fascination. Doran turned his gaze back to the map of West Eos, focusing on the north. In the past 2 years, the region had developed remarkably quickly. Eddard Stark had proven himself surprisingly adept at administration. He had transformed the settlement below Winterfell into a fully functioning city now called Winter City. Though it had not yet been officially chartered as a city, Tywin Lannister had blocked it with all his power. Robert's persuasion wouldn't take long now that Eddard was in the south. Winter City had become the North's new trade hub, with a secure and well-maintained road connecting it to White Harbor, further boosting its prosperity. Recently, it had even attracted Essozi merchants eager to trade for the North's exotic goods. And all of this had been achieved in just 2 years. Doran was certain the North would grow even stronger and more prosperous under Eddard Stark's leadership. Establishing good relations with them would greatly benefit Dorne, and if they joined the Targaryen restoration, it would be phenomenal. Edmure Tully, heir to Riverrun, was being fostered in Winterfell, a clear sign of cooperation between the North and the Riverlands. If Doran could convince Eddard Stark, 2 of the 7 major houses would join the cause. If conditions were right, Arryn might also align with them. Should the Targaryens secure the support of 4 houses, he anticipated the Tyrells abandoning their hesitance and joining as well, leaving 5 of the 7 kingdoms backing the Targaryens. It was almost a dream. But convincing Eddard Stark was crucial. Doran had recently spoken candidly with Ashara, who firmly stated that achieving such a feat within a week was impossible. Ashara could exploit Ned Stark's honor, but only to a certain extent. Pressuring him to divorce Catelyn Tully would surely cause a rift, and bringing up the Targaryen restoration might sever their relationship entirely. Ashara, however, proposed her own plan, eliminating Catelyn Tully. Without a doubt, Ned Stark would choose Ashara as his new wife. Over time, she could influence him to join the Targaryens. Moreover, she would act as a mother to young Robb Stark, securing the Tully alliance. "I would never harm Ned's child, even if he is part Trout," Ashura had said. Doran was no fool, he knew why Ashura was insistent on this plan. He had seen the madness in her eyes as she proposed it. The woman wanted her quiet wolf back. It was a solid plan, albeit a risky one. Arranging a subtle and untraceable death for Lady Stark was no small feat. Her death had to appear entirely natural, or the plan would fail. The relationship between Eddard Stark and Ashura Dayne was no secret. With Catelyn Tully out of the picture, everyone would expect the Warden of the North to marry Ashura. No, the assassination had to be flawless. Nobody could suspect foul play. Dorne had long supported promising acolytes at the Citadel financially and politically. When Doran reviewed the list of supported individuals, he was pleased to find several Northerners among them. He would carefully select one of them to be sent to Winterfell as a maester under Lewin's guidance. Over a few years, the boy would earn the trust of the Stark household. When the time came, Doran would signal him to carry out the task assigned to him. It was a perfect plan, though it would require patience and precise execution. Doran informed Ashura that he approved the plan but kept the details to himself to prevent any accidental slip of the tongue. The only information he shared was that it would take a few years. Ashura didn't care how long she had to wait, she was incredibly happy. For now, however, these were long-term concerns. Doran needed to focus on the immediate task. Eddard Stark would be staying in Dorne for a week, and Doran was determined to make the most of this visit. Lord Stark. Doran nodded as he greeted, "Welcome to Sunspear." "Thank you, Prince Doran," Eddard Stark replied, showing the same respect. "I have come here representing His Grace King Robert Baratheon." He took out a sealed letter from his inner pocket and carefully extended it to Doran. At that moment, Oberyn let out a mocking laugh. "Is the usurper's dog bringing him a letter?" "Oberyn." Doran gave his brother a sharp look as he took the letter. "He can sometimes be overly impulsive. I apologize for that." There was a marked calmness and composure in Doran's voice, but also a tone that hinted at the pain he felt inside. "It's fine, Prince Doran," Eddard Stark said, with a bitter smile on his lips. "In fact, there is something I have wanted to say for a long time. What happened to Princess Elia Martell and the children was horrendous, to put it mildly. If I had been a few hours earlier, maybe I could have stopped it. Though I am not speaking on behalf of the Crown right now, please accept our apologies on behalf of the North." Doran and Oberyn stared at Lord Stark for a long moment in silence. Then, Oberyn's voice, now soft and emotional, resonated, quite different from his earlier mocking tone. This apology means a lot. Even if it comes from an innocent man," he said, tears welling up in his eyes. "Please forgive my previous words. As my brother said, consider yourself our guest." He gestured to a servant to offer bread and salt. Eddard Stark accepted the bread and salt gratefully and then, with heavy steps, followed Doran towards the main hall. "How do you find Sunspear?" Oberyn asked with a smile, but his gaze carried a depth of thought. "Magnificent," Eddard said, with a gleam of awe in his eyes. "It's unlike anything I've ever seen." "You've been to Dorne before, but Starfall is nothing like Sunspear," Oberyn remarked, watching Lord Stark's face carefully. "Still, your experiences in both places might have been quite similar." Ned Stark furrowed his brow slightly, trying to make sense of what was being said. "I don't understand." Just then, a voice came from behind. "Ned." Eddard Stark turned suddenly. His expression changed for a split second, just a brief flicker, but Doran noticed it immediately. His eyes followed this sudden shift carefully. "Lady Dayne," Eddard said, bowing his head respectfully. "Ah, cut it out," Ashura replied, her tone playful. She swiftly moved to him and embraced him. "Everyone in Westeros knows the two of us, Ned. No need to be so distant." "Ashura, Eddard began, somewhat embarrassed, taking a deep breath. "This is an important meeting." "It doesn't matter," Doran interrupted, waving his hands dismissively, trying to ease the situation with a glance. "You've just arrived, you're tired from the journey. Go to your room and rest a bit. After reading the letter, I'll meet with you tomorrow, and you'll be our honored guest at the tournament." He gestured toward Ashura. Lady Dane, if you're not busy, please show Lord Stark to his room. Ashura smiled and, with pleasure, gently guided Eddard Stark by the arm, while Doran watched them from a distance. Ah, well, Starfall needed an heir anyway. Chapter 7, Heirs Tournament. Notes. This chapter feels more like a transitional one, showcasing how Eddard Stark has developed the North so far and sharing his plans for the future. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. The signatures are complete, Lord Stark said, the envoy from MYR. The agreement will officially take effect once it is ratified by the High Council of the City of MYR. Eddard Stark nodded silently. He rose from his seat and left the room. The rights to sell and distribute all timber exports from the North, its most valuable trade commodity, had been granted to the MYR Trade Company for 12 years. This agreement was sure to provoke strong opposition from the Northern Lords, but Eddard Stark was prepared to face that backlash. He firmly believed that what he had gained in return would fundamentally transform the future of the North. I gave them the rights to sell our timber. For the next 12 years, our profits in this trade will decrease. But in exchange, the city of MYR has agreed to share the secrets of glassmaking with House Stark. They will send glassmakers to the North to train our people. Once we learn the craft, the North will be able to produce its own glass houses. Glass houses were a vital resource, especially during the harsh winters, as they allowed crops to be grown year-round. However, the problem was that glass was prohibitively expensive. Even building a small glass house was an enormous expense. The North had never produced its own glass, as the methods for making it were unknown. In fact, only the artisans of MYR held that knowledge, and under normal circumstances, they would never sell their secrets. Ned was well aware that the balance of trade between the free cities had shifted significantly in recent years. Despite marketing a variety of luxury goods, MYR's economy had been in decline for the past 5 years. Securing the rights to sell the North's timber would provide them with a much-needed economic boost. Essos was a continent with a chronic shortage of wood and timber, while the North was abundant with high-quality trees suitable for logging. Timber sales were one of the North's largest sources of income, but the manpower required for logging was limited. Cutting down these trees and transporting them was no easy task. Under the harsh northern conditions, not everyone was capable of such labor. As a result, the North's profits from timber had been inherently capped. However, as the Lord of Winterfell, Eddard Stark had managed to resolve this issue within 2 years, drastically increasing timber production in the North. And he had done it with one simple method. Rickard Stark had insisted on the Tully alliance for political and economic support, but for Eddard Stark, there was another reason. Yes, an alliance with the Riverlands brought many advantages, but his father had overlooked the real prize, the massive water wheels of Riverrun. Eddard Stark had been deeply impressed by the water wheels when he first visited Riverrun. These machines were the reason House Tully was so efficient in grain production. However, even Hoster Tully himself failed to grasp their full potential. The North was crisscrossed with rivers and rushing streams. Utilizing his Tully alliance, Ned had learned how the water wheels were constructed and operated. He then adapted this knowledge to build timber mills. In addition, he identified suitable river routes for transportation and provided boat handling training to workers. Northern wood was exceptionally hard, cutting it down was one challenge, processing it into timber was another, and transporting the heavy timber to ports was yet another major obstacle. Eddard Stark had eliminated the second and third problems. The North could now produce timber without relying on human labor. This advantage had dramatically increased timber production across the North and filled the coffers of many northern houses with gold. At present, they were exporting significant quantities of timber, but Ned knew this situation was temporary. Eventually, the market would saturate, and demand for timber would decline. Eddard took pride in what he considered his masterpiece over the past 2 years, Winter City. Instead of selling all the timber produced by House Stark, it had been used to build Winter City. Skilled artisans and merchants from all over had been encouraged to settle in the city. Inns had been constructed at key locations, and travel was made easier by renovating the long-neglected King's Road and building a new route connecting Winter City to White Harbor. None of these constructions were free, they required enormous financial resources. Of the 300,000 gold coins Eddard had received from Robert, 140,000 had been spent on these projects. However, the water wheels had helped reduce costs, otherwise, the expense could have reached 170,000. Thanks to these initiatives, tax revenues across the north had increased significantly. The taxes collected on Stark-owned lands had quadrupled, while those of the Mandaealis had doubled. Even the grim Roose Bolton had been compelled to express his satisfaction. All these achievements had been made possible by a simple water wheel. Thinking about the water wheels brought Caitlin to mind. Their relationship had begun to crumble even before it started, with Eddard Stark bringing a bastard to Winterfell. Caitlin had initially demanded the child be sent away and later pressed for the name of his mother. Ned had refused to answer both questions. While he had a compelling story ready about Jon's mother, the servants at Winterfell believed it was Ashera Dayne. He chose to remain silent. Long-term lies could easily backfire. Caitlin had been infuriated by his silence and began to distance herself from his bed. Ned hadn't been surprised. He knew that Septars often taught girls such strategies, though he personally found them counterproductive. Avoiding the bed of an unfaithful husband was unlikely to bring him back, in fact, it might drive him further away. In Ned's case, this rule also held true. He couldn't deny that his days in Dorne had been enjoyable. Ned had considered attending the Quentyn tournament when invited but ultimately decided against it. Starks rarely ventured south, and Dorne was far away. Visiting Dorne might make him seem like a lord neglecting his duties for the sake of a lover. Later, when he received news of Joffrey's birth and a series of letters from Robert urging him to attend the great tournament, Ned had no choice but to comply. Yet he also saw an opportunity in the visit. Upon reaching King's Landing, he was greeted by Robert and Jon Arryn. During their conversation, Ned had steered the topic toward Dorne, suggesting to Jon Arryn that at least a royal envoy should be sent for the Quentyn tournament. Robert dismissed the idea, claiming any envoy sent to Dorne would likely be killed. Then, as Ned had hoped, Jon Arryn suggested a brilliant alternative, sending Eddard Stark, a figure highly respected in Dorne. Ned had several reasons to visit Dorne. One of them was, of course, to see Ashera and her daughter Illyria. However, his primary purpose was to negotiate a trade agreement for the regular supply of sand, a known raw material used in glassmaking. The visit had been fruitful for both parties, perhaps especially so for Ashera. Before leaving Sunspear, Ashera had been certain she was pregnant. The two had even discussed names, Edric for a boy and Sansa for a girl. Lord Stark, a servant called from behind. The king requests your presence in the council chamber. Ned sighed, his thoughts interrupted, and followed the servant. It wasn't hard to guess why he was being summoned. Hey, Ned. Robert bellowed as soon as he entered. Apologies for the sudden call, but these fools are throwing ridiculous accusations your way. Eddard Stark calmly greeted his king and took his seat. May I hear the charges? According to recent reports, came Tywin Lannister's arrogant voice. The North has been actively purchasing slaves from Essos. As Master of Whisperers, I must regrettably confirm this, said Varys. It appears these slave purchases began 3 months ago, with approximately 350 slaves acquired so far. The information you've been given is incorrect, Lord Varys, Ned corrected. We've been purchasing slaves for about 5 months, and the actual number is 732. Everyone in the council chamber stared at Ned Stark in shock. Yes, the North had been acquiring slaves. Of the 732, around 250 were skilled artisans and masters of their craft, while the rest were their family members. Are you confessing to your crime, Lord Stark? Tywin asked. Slavery is absolutely forbidden under both the old gods and the new. I don't need a lecture on the law from you, Lannister Ned replied through clenched teeth. Every slave brought to White Harbor has had their chains broken and been made a free person upon arrival. We then offer them jobs in the North. Most of the freed slaves had gratefully accepted these job offers. Life in the North was harsh, but House Stark had freed these individuals and their families without expecting anything in return, treated them with respect as skilled artisans, and offered them honest work. The settlement of these freed slaves had only recently begun, but they were already fiercely loyal to House Stark. This does not change the fact that you're engaging in the purchase of slaves, Tywin retorted. Enough. Robert slammed his hand on the table. I won't have this nonsense ruining the tourney for my heir. Everyone here knows Ned would never practice slavery. This discussion is over. This is not something we can just gloss over, Robert Jonarin interjected. I'm sure Ned's intentions are good, but if we allow him to take slaves, other lords might start doing the same. Ned paused for a moment and then nodded. I wasn't expecting them to allow these purchases for long anyway. I have brought 250 craftsmen and masters into the country. I hope this number will be sufficient for the development of the North. Well, effective immediately, the North will stop the acquisition of slaves. Although Tywin Lannister had achieved his goal, he was angry because no sanctions were imposed on the North, but he kept quiet since the king had spoken his final word. Since the council is gathered, I have my own requests as well, Ned said. A few months ago, I submitted a petition for a city charter for Winter City. We have met all the necessary requirements and provided all the documents. Jonarin nodded in agreement. However, our request has still not been approved, and no reason has been given. Approved, Robert said with a dismissive wave. Jon, handle the paperwork. Now, Ned, let's leave this nonsense behind and enjoy the tournament. As Eddard followed his king out of the chamber, he found himself smiling involuntarily. For the love of the gods, I do adore this man. I endured so much trouble with him in the Eyrie, but it was all worth it. Ned sighed with relief as he entered his room. It was good to be home again. Just then, he heard footsteps behind him and a muffled voice. My lord. Ned turned around and nodded politely to his wife. My lady. I know you went to Dorne. Were you with that woman again? Catelyn Tully asked. Ned had just arrived home and didn't have the energy for an argument, but he sighed as he looked at her. Yes, I was. It seems carrying one of your bastards wasn't enough for her, Catelyn Tully said in a sarcastic tone. A bastard? Does she know about Illyria? Ned looked at Catelyn with slightly furrowed brows. Ah, no. She's talking about Jon. My lady, I am tired now and... Ned couldn't finish his sentence before the woman suddenly lunged at him, pushing him hard onto the bed. Eddard had to admit he was a bit surprised. She had proven to be quite strong for her size. My lady, what? Shut your mouth, said Catelyn, climbing on top of him and wrapping her legs around his neck. How does that woman take you? Does she do it like this? Show me everything. Eddard Stark looked at his wife in astonishment, thinking to himself, well, this night will be interesting. Notes. Don't forget to leave a kudos. Chapter 8, Catelyn Tully. Summary. I wish everyone a happy new year. This chapter is my gift to all my active readers as a New Year's present. Notes. 3 years after Robert's rebellion. Chapter text. Catelyn Tully lovingly embraced her little daughter. Sansa was a true Tully beauty, red hair and blue eyes. Ned had claimed that she would grow to be as beautiful as her mother, but Catelyn believed Sansa would be an even more beautiful woman than herself because she was born out of love. As she gazed at the baby, Catelyn sighed. If it hadn't been for that wretched Dornish whore, Catelyn could have had many more children born of love with her loyal and honorable husband Eddard. But no, fate had intervened and stood in her way. She remembered the dance night at the Harrenhal tournament. At that time, Catelyn was with her temporary fiancé Brandon. Until then, she had only exchanged a few words with Eddard, which was not unexpected. Ned was the kind of man who would never look at his brother's fiancé, which is why the infamous fiancé had to be removed from the picture. Catelyn wasn't foolish, she was fully aware of what kind of man Brandon was. He would never be a loyal husband, and she doubted he would even respect her as a woman. No, Catelyn had no intention of marrying him. My father wants me to marry the heir of the North, so I will marry the heir of the North. Eddard will make a much better Lord of Winterfell than his brother ever could, she thought. Additionally, Catelyn had accidentally seen Eddard and Brandon swimming naked in the river. She couldn't help but smirk at the memory. Brandon might have boasted about his swordsmanship, but Eddard's sword was, in fact, much larger and more impressive. The plan was simple. She used the foolish boy, Petyr Baelish, who was in love with her because of a few kisses she had given him as a child. She went to him, cried, and told him she didn't want to marry Brandon. Naturally, the foolish boy overestimated himself and challenged Brandon for Caitlyn's hand. Petter would undoubtedly lose and be killed by Brandon. Caitlyn would mourn Petter's death and refuse to marry Brandon, keeping her distance until the wedding. Petter Baelish's death alone wouldn't be enough to annul the engagement, but when Rickard Stark arrived at Riverrun and learned of Brandon's affair with Barbary Riswell, her father's sense of honor and love for his family would outweigh his ambition. He would tell Rickard Stark under no circumstances would his daughter marry Brandon. The Tully-Stark alliance was critical for Rickard, and Brandon had already proven he wouldn't make a good lord for the North. From what Caitlyn observed, Rickard Stark was far from pleased with his heir and proud of his second son, Eddard. It wouldn't take long for Brandon to be disinherited, and Eddard, the husband Caitlyn wanted, would take his place. When Brandon approached Ashara Dane to convince her to dance with Eddard, Caitlyn was pleased. Surely, that foolish woman would fall into Brandon's bed and become one of his conquests. Once the names of both Barbary and Ashara Dane as dishonored women surfaced, her father would have no choice but to cancel the engagement. Of course, poor, heartbroken Eddard Stark would need comfort, and Caitlyn would gladly console him and his large sword. Soon, Ashara would be forgotten, and Caitlyn would be the only woman he looked at, his true partner. But she had greatly underestimated Ashara Dane. This woman was Elia Martell's lady-in-waiting. She had emerged from the Red Keep. She had watched a mad king burn people alive. She wasn't a woman who could be conquered by men like Brandon, she was far beyond that. When Ashara Dane looked at Eddard, she saw the same thing Caitlyn had seen in the past, a perfect husband. From that moment, everything went wrong for Caitlyn. Within days, Ashara and Ned's romantic relationship became the talk of the realm, a tale still told across Westeros today. Brandon had failed to kill Petter Baelish, and the events that followed were sheer madness, far beyond anything Caitlyn had imagined. Yet, for the Tully family, things turned out favorably. Caitlyn got the husband she wanted, but he wasn't hers, another woman had already claimed him, and Ned had brought that woman's bastard to Winterfell. Still, there was hope, everything could be set right again. Caitlyn looked at the letter in her hand. It bore no seal and was written in code, but she could decipher it with ease. The servant she had placed in Starfall had secured a good position within the castle. Soon, Ashara Dane, unable to bear the loss of the man she loved, would throw herself from the Palestone sword. Caitlyn knew that Ashara's tragic end would be seen as a desperate act of grief, but in truth, it was all carefully orchestrated. A crooked smile spread across Caitlyn's face. As soon as Ashara and Ned's bastard child died, Caitlyn could easily imagine how Ned would react. He would withdraw into himself, crushed under the weight of his grief. His honor would be tested by the shock of the loss. In those moments, Caitlyn would be the harbor of peace for him, the faithful wife, still standing by his side after the painful memories of the Dornish woman had faded away. Caitlyn knew she had to play this role carefully. She would offer him words of understanding, share in his sorrow, and remind him that the family they had built together was still strong. The Stark name would live on, not as the legacy of a Dornish scandal, but through the love and devotion of a loyal wife. While Ned mourned, Caitlyn would comfort him softly. She would whisper, "We can rebuild together, Ned." She would stroke his head, slowly breaking down the walls of grief he had built around himself. Over time, Ned would come to see Caitlyn as the only real support in his life. She looked at Sansa, she was the perfect proof of their union, of their love. She thought of the other children they would have, children born of their blood, Stark blood, who would come into the world strengthened by the unbreakable bond of their marriage. Yes, when Ashara was gone, the temple Ned had built in his heart for her would vanish. And then, Ned would be completely hers. Just as it was always meant to be. Chapter 9, Benjen Stark. Notes. Another interlude-like chapter, written to show how Eddard Stark handled the North while secretly engaging in dark and underhand dealings in the background. Chapter text. Are you sure you want to do this? Howland asked. I have professional soldiers with me. They can handle it. You don't need to get personally involved. We Starks follow the old way, Benjen reminded him. If you're going to kill someone, you should look them in the eye and hear their last words. Howland stared at him for a while. Fine, he said at last. But if you get caught, Lord Stark won't protect you. I won't get caught, Benjen thought, pulling his hood over his head and vanishing into the night's darkness. Brandon had disappointed the North. Lyanna had disappointed the North. Eddard had to clean up their mess. I won't. Never again. He was dressed completely in black, fitting perfectly into the darkness of the night. Black had always been Benjen's color, and he knew it. Since childhood, he had wanted to be a member of the Night's Watch, preparing himself for that duty. But no, not anymore. After all the destruction he had helped cause, joining the Watch now would be running away, not serving. He had helped with Lyanna's foolishness, and the North, including House Stark, had paid the price. While his brother Eddard worked outside to fix his siblings' mistakes and save their family's honor, Benjen had stayed in Winterfell, waiting for him to handle it all. Just like Brandon. Just like Lyanna. Not again, he thought as he climbed toward Great Barrow. Never again. He removed the grappling hook from his back and threw it onto the wooden walls of Barrow Hall. Benjen had trained for climbing, preparing for joining the Watch, dreaming of scaling the wall, and had made his preparations accordingly. Compared to the wall, Barrow Hall, needless to say, was much shorter. Tonight, there would be fewer guards, and those who were there would be rookies. Everything had been arranged in advance. Finally, he slipped inside through a window on the second floor. His target lived on the third floor, at the highest point, but all the windows on the third floor had been wisely barred. So, Benjen would have to descend to the second floor and then climb to the top. The corridor was lined with enormous tapestries. Barbary Dustin loved extravagant displays, but Benjen knew the tapestries would be perfect for hiding as he made his way through the hallway. There were guards on the stairs to the third floor, but Benjen knew the patrol change was about to happen. He just had to wait. Then, he climbed the stairs. The entire third floor was dedicated to a single person, the current Lady of Barrowton. 2 seasoned Ryswell guards stood watch at the door. Barbary might have been ruling Barrowton, but she trusted nothing associated with House Dustin. "Who are you?" one of the guards asked cautiously. "I have a message from Lord Stark." "It's urgent," Benjen said, sliding a gloved hand into his pocket and pulling out the sealed letter. "Give me the letter," the guard said quickly, grabbing it and checking the seal. "It looks correct." The guard suddenly started to tremble and collapsed to the ground. His companion looked at him in confusion, and Benjen immediately took advantage of the opportunity. A swift strike for the standing guard and another for the one writhing on the floor. Before opening the door, Benjen picked up the letter from the floor and tucked it back into his pocket. Poison on the seal, he thought. Crannog men were truly terrifying people. He entered the room silently. There she was, standing by the bed. Who are you?" she asked timidly. Benjen gently closed the door behind him and lowered his hood, showing his face. If I'm going to kill her, she deserves to see her killer's face, Benjen thought. He looked at the woman in front of him, Barbary Dustin. After her husband William Dustin's death, she had claimed the title of Lady of Barrowton using the widow's law. All of the Dustin bannermen had rebelled, starting an uprising because, according to the law, Barbary had to either have Dustin blood or a child with Dustin blood to claim the title. This woman had neither. Benjen was surprised when his brother Eddard allowed the law to be enforced despite all objections and ignored the bannermen's rebellion because he knew that Ned wanted Dustin's lands. When Benjen asked his brother about it, Eddard had simply replied, "We cannot take Dustin's lands for ourselves just like that. Such things require comprehensive plans." Later, Benjen realized that this was part of a multi-layered plan. First, the rebellion of Dustin's bannermen demonstrated how disliked Barbary was and showed that taking control of Barrowton from her would be relatively easy. Second, Barrowton falling into Ryswell hands had raised alarms among other northern bannermen. While all the northern bannermen were loyal to the Starks, they formed political alliances to safeguard their own interests. The Ryswell-Bolton alliance was one of these, and after the Ryswell family took Barrowton, all the other northern factions saw them as enemies and distanced themselves. When Barrowton's lord changed, they would be very pleased. The rebellious bannermen had not been punished or appeased, they had been ignored. They were still angry, and they would welcome the change of lordship eagerly. Taking Dustin's land was crucial for House Stark, and even more important for the north. The southern part of Dustin's lands would be needed for a project that would completely reshape the future of not just the north, but all of Westeros. This was why Benjen had to carry out such a dishonorable act. He grabbed the dagger tightly and looked into the woman's eyes, preparing to hear her final words. Who are you?" the woman asked. "Please, don't." Benjen quickly stabbed her, ending her life. It was a clean, painless death, but what he had to do next was truly disgusting. After composing himself, Benjen grabbed the dagger again and began to move toward the woman's limbs. Then, he stopped. Why didn't she recognize me? He wondered. We've never met, but I look like a typical Stark. If she had met my brother, she would have recognized me as a Stark. There are only 2 adult Stark men, and my blue eyes should have given away my identity. He checked the body's face and hands. The hands were rough and calloused, not the hands of a noble woman, but of a servant. This woman was not Barbary Dustin. Benjen immediately stood up and began to examine the room. The curtains were drawn, the bed was too low, and something didn't feel right. Where did she hide? A secret exit. He looked to the side. The wardrobe. He rushed toward the wardrobe, and at that moment, a woman with a dagger lunged out at him. Benjen grabbed her dagger hand with his empty hand and dealt the final blow with his other hand. "Any last words?" he asked, looking into the real Barbary Dustin's eyes. "You Starks took everything from me," the woman spat with hatred. "William. If you loved William Dustin so much," Benjen cut in, "why did you sleep with Brandon while you were engaged to him?" A look of shame crossed her face as she died. Benjen sighed as he let her body fall to the ground, placing the servant's body in a corner. Now, he had to do the truly disgusting part of the task. He drew a bloody 5-pointed star on the wall with his dagger, nailing Barbary Dustin's head and limbs to the points of the star, leaving her torso in the center. The 5-pointed star was the sigil of House Bloodall. House Bloodall was one of Dustin's bannermen, with a reputation as bad as the Boltons. Their current leader, Ed Bloodall, was known as a rapist and murderer, and he was staying at an inn in Barrowton. Barbary had probably invited him, hoping to form an alliance and secure a reliable bannerman. By morning, a servant would find Barbary's body. Everyone would know who the killer was. With Ed Bloodall in Barrowton, the connection would be obvious. Eddard would immediately intervene, wiping out House Bloodall. Then, seeing the chaos in the region, he would choose Benjen as the new Lord of Barrowton. Benjen would marry a Dustin bannerman to secure their loyalty, and their children would bear the Dustin name. This way, the Dustin family's thousands of years of history would not disappear, and the southern land titles of Dustin would be transferred to House Stark, preventing any future issues for the great project. Everyone except the Ryswells and Boltons would be pleased. The Ryswells had overstepped recently, and Ned Stark would punish them as soon as possible. As for the Boltons, Benjen's brother had been clear on the matter: the Boltons should either be tools of the Starks or cease to exist. Benjen knew his brother's plans. If successful, and it already seemed to be, Northern power would grow far stronger and wealthier than any rival kingdom. No one would dare question them. Old gods forgive me, Benjen thought bitterly as he left the room. Everything is for a stronger North. Chapter 10, Winterfell. Notes. 4 years after Robert's rebellion. Chapter text. A would-be assassin tried to throw Ashura from the Palestone sword. When Ned read the letter in his hand, his first reaction was anger, and his second was confusion. Why would anyone try to kill Ashura? He sat down and thought about it seriously. Could it have been someone from Dorne? No, Ashura was politically neutral and respected as Elia Martell's former lady-in-waiting. What about the other southern kingdoms? Would Tywin Lannister attempt such a thing? It didn't make sense. Such an act would only further strain the already fragile relations between the Westerlands and the North. Tywin was a man who only resorted to assassination if it served his interests. The other likely names had no plausible motive to attack Ashura. What about the North? Could the Ryswells or Boltons have learned the truth about Barbary's death and sought vengeance in their own way? But no, their reach wouldn't extend as far as Dorne. That left Ned with only one logical suspect: the Tullys. Ed Muir was still a boy under Ned's wardship and couldn't have ordered such an act. Catelyn, as a proper southern lady, was far too honorable for such schemes and wouldn't even know how to carry one out. Lysa, from what Ned had heard, had gone mad and seemed to take delight in her sister's humiliation. Brynden Tully was immediately ruled out. He was far too honorable for assassination. That left one name, Hoster Tully. Ned's last encounter with the old man had been during the Ayers tourney. He had made it clear that he had no intention of divorcing Catelyn for Ashura and had repeatedly assured Hoster of his children's future position as Lords of Winterfell. By the end of their conversation, the old man had seemed satisfied with what he'd heard. Besides, Ned had not lied or put on an act. The common tale was that the Tullys joined the rebellion because Ned had sacrificed his love for Ashura to marry Catelyn, but that wasn't true. If he had wanted, Ned could have suggested Robert Baratheon or Stannis, the future Storm Lord, as a match, and Hoster Tully would have been convinced. But no, he had played the role of the heartbroken lover who gave up everything for duty because he valued an alliance with the Riverlands more than his love for Ashura. Every move Ned made was for a stronger North, even if some of those moves pained him deeply. Hoster Tully had forced him into marrying Catelyn, but to be honest, Ned didn't resent him for it. The Riverlands had always been vulnerable to invasions and raids. Some of the Tully bannermen had larger armies, greater wealth, or stronger alliances than the Tullys themselves. Their position was precarious, and the old man had acted in the best interests of both his family and his lands. Still, if Hoster Tully was behind the assassination attempt on Ashura, Eddard Stark would not forgive him. He would have to find a way to teach the Tullys a lesson without breaking their alliance, a thought that gave Ned a headache. Yet, his trusted instincts told him that Hoster was not the culprit. He sighed as he placed the letter on the table. After surviving the assassination attempt, Ashura had thrown the servant who tried to kill her from the tower. If only they could have interrogated the assassin, they might have discovered who was behind this plot. For now, all he could do was send Ashura his condolences, ask for her thoughts on the possible culprits, and advise her to take greater precautions. A smile spread across Ned's face as he read the second letter. The mining experts he had brought from Essos had surveyed the Mountain Clan regions and discovered abundant silver and iron deposits. The high purity of both metals pleased Ned greatly, and the large expanse of the area suggested that more mines might yet be found. They were already speculating about the presence of a tin mine. The active trade of these resources to the south and Essos would open a new revenue stream for the north. But Ned was in no rush. First, he needed to secure the region and the mining rights. Until that was done, he would keep the discoveries a secret. What he read next made him curse aloud. The gold mine he had long sought had finally been discovered, but it was in Ryswell territory. Damn it, nearly all of the North's bannermen were fiercely loyal to the Starks, except for the suspicious Boltons and the increasingly insolent Ryswells. Of all places, the North's first gold mine had to be in their lands. The old gods must be mocking him. The rest of the letter calmed him slightly. It seemed the mine was located on the Ryswell-Dustin border. Moreover, its purity was low, and the mine itself was small. Even so, Ned would not leave such wealth in the hands of the Ryswells. He decided to keep this information secret as well. He picked up the next letter. After the victory in the rebellion, the lands of the new gift had been returned to the north. Yet, agricultural efforts in the region had still not yielded significant results. Ned was trying to discover crops that could thrive in the cold without requiring greenhouse protection. He had brought in seeds from various regions and even called upon agricultural experts from Braavos. It was an expensive project. Ned had even imported seeds from Yunkai, but no definitive success had been achieved yet. However, failure was not guaranteed. The Braavosi engineers had studied the soil of the north and suggested new farming methods. Ned had tested these methods on a few farms and obtained promising results. Soon, he would issue an order encouraging their adoption across the north. The final letter came from Lord Glover, expressing gratitude and reaffirming his house's loyalty to the Starks. Ned was unsurprised. He had received a similar letter from House Flint of Widow's Watch the previous week. These expressions of gratitude stemmed from one thing. Lorath, the smallest and oldest of the free cities, possessed unique fishing techniques that allowed its people to sustain themselves year-round, even when the seas froze. Ned had brought Lorathi master fishermen to the north and assigned them to the coastal lords. The feedback so far had been overwhelmingly positive. However, what he read next made his eyebrows rise. The Ironborn were raiding the coasts, which was no surprise, but what was unusual was that they weren't targeting villages. Instead, they were attacking lumber mills and stealing timber. Ned wasn't a fool. He knew exactly what this meant. The Greyjoys were preparing for another rebellion. The stolen wood was likely being used for shipbuilding. Normally, he would warn King Robert, but a glance at the map changed his mind. If Balon Greyjoy launched a rebellion, he would target the wealth of the Westerlands, not the poor and barren north. Sorry, Robert, but weakening the Lannisters would serve the realm's greater good. He ordered Glover to keep this information confidential and wrote a warning letter to Jason Mallister, a loyal ally of the North. Jason would secure Seaguard without leaking the information. Finally, Ned opened the last letter. Roose Bolton. The right of the first night has been invoked. A rape beneath the gallows. A bastard exists. A wolfish smile spread across Ned's face. It was time to deal with the Boltons. Oh, Roose, you cannot begin to imagine what a bastard can bring about. Chapter 11, Tywin Lannister. Summary. In Asoyaf law, titles like Duke or Count are generally absent, but there are certainly distinctions in rank among lords. It can be structured as follows. King, Lord Paramount, Stark, Great Lord, Glover, Bannerman House, Forrester, Knightly House, Bowl. It's important to note that this hierarchy is purely positional. Some knightly houses can be more powerful than a Great Lord. For instance, the Templetons of the Vale are a knightly house, but they are as wealthy as a Great Lord and can raise thousands of troops in times of war. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. The damage to the harbour is extensive, Tywin Kevan reported. Additionally, nearly our entire fleet has been burned. We'll need to rebuild everything from scratch. Tywin Lannister sighed in frustration. Rebuilding the fleet and harbour would be both time-consuming and expensive. Securing the necessary timber for all the reconstruction was another major problem. Relations with the North were strained. Eddard Stark would likely refuse to sell, and no northern bannerman would dare trade with the Lannisters, who were at odds with the Starks. The northern bannermen were, as Tywin saw it, absurdly loyal to their liege, and if he were honest, Tywin couldn't deny a tinge of envy for that level of devotion. Not all of them were loyal, though, he reminded himself. The Ryswells and Boltons had questionable allegiances, but they were of no use to Tywin. Both houses had been brought to the brink of ruin after the so-called Trial of the Wolf. Tywin didn't know all the details of the incident. During the spring festival regularly held at Winterfell, Lord Harley's Hornwood had suddenly risen and leveled accusations against the Boltons. Allegations of heinous crimes such as enforcing the first night and raping a woman under the gallows had been made. It was well known that the Hornwoods and Boltons were at odds, so Tywin initially dismissed the accusations as slander. However, it seemed that Lord Hornwood had prepared his move meticulously. A closed-door trial was held in the presence of all the major northern lords, and conclusive evidence was presented to support the claims. Even the Ryswells, longtime allies of the Boltons, could not shield Roose Bolton. In the end, Roose Bolton was found guilty and imprisoned in the deepest ice cells of Winterfell. Eddard Stark wrote a letter to King Robert, requesting authorization to execute Lord Bolton. At the execution stand, Roose Bolton pleaded to join the Night's Watch, but Eddard Stark denied the request, citing the king's order. Roose then made a desperate offer, in exchange for being sent to the Night's Watch and guaranteeing his son Domeric's future as the next Lord Bolton, he would expose the traitors in the north. What followed was chaos. Roose Bolton revealed not just rumors but actual evidence, including hidden caches of correspondence with certain lords, heirs, or noble figures. The trial dragged on for a week. Some lords and heirs were severely punished, sent to the Night's Watch. However, the North's general loyalty meant that most of these traitors came from minor houses. The exception was the Ryswells. House Ryswell faced heavy taxes for the next decade, and several family members, including Lord Roderick Ryswell, were sent to the Night's Watch. Although they were allowed to retain control of the Rills, their lordly status was downgraded from a great house to a bannerman house. The title Lords of the Rills was granted to House Ironsmith, a Stark loyal family known for their expertise in blacksmithing. The Ironsmiths had once been vassals to the Ryswells, but now they were their new masters. Vassal houses were usually insignificant compared to their liege lords, but houses like the ironsmiths and foresters were exceptions in the north. Despite their vassal status, their power rivaled their lords, earning them respect far above their rank. Such powerful vassals existed throughout Westeros. The Templetons of the Vale were a prime example, a knightly house capable of fielding thousands of men in war. The Boltons, in comparison, received much lighter punishments. Roose Bolton was sent to the Night's Watch, and the victims of his crimes were compensated by House Bolton. Significant portions of the Bolton lands in the south were granted to House Hornwood, and the last surviving Bolton, an 8-year-old boy named Domeric Bolton, was brought to Winterfell to be raised and ensure his future loyalty. Tywine could easily mock Eddard Stark's foolishness. The Boltons had always been a house of questionable loyalty, and Ned Stark should have seized the opportunity to eliminate their last member and rid the North of them for good. But, of course, he wouldn't do that. He would spout nonsense like, "Children are not responsible for their parents' crimes." And the price of this mercy would eventually be paid by the innocent civilians suffering under oppression and the future lords of Winterfell, who would have to constantly monitor the Boltons to prevent a potential rebellion. Regardless, Eddard Stark's foolishness was of no concern to Tywine. Right now, he needed northern timber. He could source timber from the south, but it wouldn't match the quality of what the north provided. Tywine Lannister always demanded the best for his house and wouldn't settle for less. He could trade not with the north directly but with the Myrish Trade Company that controlled the north's timber export rights to Essos. However, this wasn't Tywine's preferred method. The Myrish merchants' rights were limited to Essos, and they wouldn't want to jeopardize their relationship with the north by selling to Westeros. Tywine would have to expend considerable effort and political resources to persuade them, and he would likely pay 3 to 4 times the usual price for the timber. No, the best option was to negotiate with Eddard Stark and repair relations with the north. The north was rapidly becoming a powerful kingdom, and maintaining bad relations with them wouldn't benefit House Lannister. While Tywine had no qualms about using violence, it was never his first choice. He preferred political maneuvers or forging alliances through marriage. In fact, now that he thought about it, perhaps he could propose his granddaughter Myrcilla's hand to young Robb Stark. "Very well," Tywine said to Kevan. "Arrange a meeting with Lord Stark. I'll try to convince him to sell us timber." "I doubt he'll meet with you right now," Brother Kevan replied. "And making such a proposal at this moment would be inappropriate." Tywine raised an eyebrow. "Why is that?" "Ah, so you haven't heard," Kevan said. "While we were suppressing the Greyjoy rebellion in the Iron Islands, Lady Catelyn gave birth to a daughter for Lord Stark but succumbed to childbirth fever shortly afterward." As Tywine walked through the corridor, he thought to himself, "This changes many things." He paused briefly, trying to anticipate Eddard Stark's next moves. Since the man was an honorable fool, it wasn't a difficult task. In the faith of the Seven, it was customary to mourn a deceased spouse for 7 months. Of course, Eddard Stark followed the old gods, meaning he wasn't bound by these rules. However, knowing his character, he would likely respect his wife's faith and observe the mourning period. As for whom he would marry next, the answer was obvious: Ashura Dayne. Tywine could already see the dangers of such a union. Ashura had been a lady-in-waiting to Elia Martell and despised Robert Baratheon. Her hatred for the Lannisters was even greater. Such a woman becoming the Lady of Winterfell was a grave threat. She would likely sabotage any efforts to mend relations between the North and the Westerlands, and worse, she could encourage the North to betray House Baratheon. Tywine didn't think Eddard Stark would betray his old friend Robert, but he vividly remembered his former enemy, Elyn Rain. That woman had nearly toppled the Lannisters' position as Lords Paramount of the Westerlands. Ashura Dayne was cut from the same cloth, a thorny rose, indeed. Over his long political career, Tywine had realized that women could be crudely divided into 2 groups. The first were ordinary women, those who dreamed of handsome knights and white horse princes. Without the protection of their families, such women were often used and discarded by their so-called princes. They had no exceptional abilities or talents of their own. Being ordinary wasn't a crime, but it wasn't admirable either, and most of the women Tywine had met fell into this category. The late Queen Rolla was one of them, and unfortunately, so was his own daughter, Cersei, no matter how much she thought otherwise. The second, much smaller group were what Tywine referred to as thorny roses. These women were not to be underestimated. They used their social standing, personal talents, and physical beauty as tools for advancing their futures, and they were not afraid to bend the rules or compromise their morals to achieve their goals. During the tourney of Harrenhal, Eddard Stark had been a popular target for such women, though he was completely oblivious to it. While it was true he was a second son and not expected to inherit, he had strong ties with 4 lords paramount and was practically guaranteed to hold a lordship in the future. With his connections, it was almost inevitable that he would one day serve on the king's council. His reputation for honor ensured he would treat his wife with respect and loyalty. Though he was not as dashing as his older brother, he had his own charm. As a second son, he also had more freedom in choosing a bride. For a thorny rose, there could hardly be a more appealing target. Eddard Stark was often surrounded by women, but he remained unaware of it because Ashara Dayne had ensured they were driven away through various subtle means. According to what Tywine had heard from Geryon, Eddard's older brother Brandon had been perplexed by the attention his younger brother received. The women who sought Eddard's company showed no interest in Brandon. For a thorny rose, Brandon was a bad investment. Pursuing him would likely result in being discarded after bearing a bastard. Even marriage would not guarantee loyalty from such an unfaithful man. With Eddard around, focusing on Brandon made no sense. Regardless, Tywine had decided that Ashara Dayne must not become the Lady of Winterfell. He had already taken his first step by suggesting to King Robert that Eddard marry his young cousin, Mercia Lannister, as a replacement for Catelyn Tully. If the king ordered it, Eddard would have no choice but to comply. However, Robert had rejected the idea outright, declaring he would not subject his old friend to the same suffering he had endured. He wouldn't separate Eddard from the woman he loved. Jon Arryn agreed, arguing that the marriage would improve relations with Dorne. Tywine cursed silently. He had rid himself of a mad king only to deal with a fool. The path was clear, Ashara Dayne had to die. Tywine had 7 months to act, and he was confident the assassination would succeed. After all, how well guarded could a simple lady possibly be? Once Ashara was gone, he could bring up Mercia's name again. If this marriage succeeded, it would secure the timber Tywine needed and plant Lannister influence firmly in the increasingly powerful north. I'll instruct Tijet to arrange the assassins, Tywine decided. And I'll speak with Mercia as well. She must do everything in her power to charm Eddard Stark while he's still here. Better yet, she should get him into her bed. If she succeeds, I can secure the position of Lady of Winterfell without even bothering to kill Ashara Dayne. Tywine gazed out the window, watching the sun set. He envisioned the Lannisters spreading their influence across the realm. Why should the North be an exception? Notes. Don't forget to leave kudos. Mercia Lannister is not a canon character, I made her up because I had difficulty finding a suitable Lannister woman. Chapter 12, Olenna Tyrell. Chapter text. So, Catelyn Tully Stark is dead. Olenna began tapping her finger on the table. There is certainly an opportunity here. Recent years had seen events that changed Westeros forever. The Targaryens had fallen, replaced by the Baratheons. The Lannisters had gained the royal bloodline they always wanted. The Iron Islands had rebelled, not only attacking the Westerlands but even Olenna's own home, Arbor. Eddard Stark had proven himself not just a great warrior but also an excellent administrator, enriching the North significantly over the last 5 years. None of these developments were in favor of House Tyrell. The new king openly disdained the Tyrells and Reach nobility. After all, the entire Reach had fought for the Mad King. And Olenna wasn't shameless enough to claim serving a Mad King was a noble cause. The truth was that House Tyrell had been little more than glorified stewards until Aegon the Conqueror elevated them to lords paramount. Everything they had now was due to the Targaryen kings. Following them was only natural. However, the loyalty of the entire Reach to the Tyrells was rare. The Reach was home to many powerful houses descended from Garth Greenhand and carrying the blood of the Gardener kings. These houses openly looked down on the Tyrells and sought to claim the title of Lord Paramount for themselves. In the event of a civil war, it wouldn't be surprising if the Lords of the Reach split into factions, much like during the Dance of the Dragons. However, Robert's rebellion unfolded differently, and the Lords of the Reach had all rallied under one banner. Robert's rebellion had been a just cause, no man of honor could deny it. Yet, not a single noble from the Reach had joined Robert Baratheon. Olenna could offer various excuses. Rhaegar seemed like he would make a good king, there were vows to uphold, and so on. But none of them would be true. The reality was that the Reach had benefited the most from the 300-year Targaryen rule. This long period of peace allowed its population to grow and its coffers to overflow. The grains and wines of the Reach were sold throughout Westeros. Even in the north, the rare farmland of the New Gift had been taken and given to the Night's Watch, forcing northern lords to rely on the Reach for grain. Moreover, many seats on the small council had been occupied by nobles from the Reach. The lords of the Reach had grown powerful and wealthy under Targaryen rule. Why would they want that to change? What the Targaryens had done for them, the Baratheons could never promise. All of the Reach had fought for the Targaryens, but the Targaryens had fallen. Now, the new king naturally distrusted the Reach and looked down on them. One by one, the advantages they had enjoyed during Targaryen rule were being stripped away. The fact that King Robert's brother Stannis Baratheon was married to a damned Florent wasn't helping matters either. House Tyrell was walking a fine line. Doran Martell was seeking their help for a new Targaryen restoration, but it was too risky. Even if the Tyrells raised their banners for the Targaryens, this time the entire Reach wouldn't follow. A significant portion would side with the Baratheons, especially the Florents. The Florents had always been the most vocal opponents of the Tyrells' Lord Paramount status. Unfortunately, their threat went beyond mere complaints. Those damned foxes had marital ties to nearly every major noble family in the Reach. Ra Florent had married Lord Hightower and become Lady of Old Town, while another Florent daughter had married Lord Tarly. The Tarlys and Hightowers were among the most powerful houses in the Reach. If a rebellion broke out, would they support the Lord Paramount or their allies by marriage? Olenna didn't know. The defeat of the Greyjoy rebellion had boosted the new king's image and consolidated his support. His position on the throne was more secure than ever, making any challenge to him extremely risky. Olenna had repeatedly assured Robert Baratheon and Jon Arryn of House Tyrell's loyalty to the crown, but they didn't trust her. Why should they? Words were wind, loyalty had to be proven. The best way to prove loyalty was through a marriage alliance. But among the rebellion's leaders, there were no eligible men, either they were already married or too young. Until now. Eddard Stark, Robert Baratheon's close friend, was favored by the king more than his own brothers. If Olenna could marry her daughter Janna to him, all doubts about House Tyrell's loyalty would dissipate like sand in the wind. The North had reclaimed the New Gift and begun cultivating it, reducing trade with the Reach each year. Reach lords were losing the steady flow of gold they once enjoyed and were beginning to complain. But complaints would do them no good. The new king wouldn't listen, and even if he did, what exactly would they complain about? The North was growing stronger, but it wasn't doing anything illegal. A marriage alliance would be the perfect way to establish a connection with the rising North. It could ensure trade continued as before, earning gratitude from other houses in the Reach. The king might even begin to trust them. House Tyrell would finally stand on solid ground. Still, it wouldn't be easy. Undoubtedly, many other nobles coveted the same position. Olenna had already heard that the old lion, Tywin Lannister, was making moves. Many northern and southern lords wanted the new Lady of Winterfell to come from their own house. Olenna wasn't afraid to engage in a political battle to make her daughter Janna the Lady of Winterfell. She was confident, viewing no one but Tywin as her equal. The real problem was that this political battle might be entirely unnecessary. As long as Ashara Dayne was alive, Eddard Stark wouldn't even glance at another woman. The story of the two being together at Harrenhal was a widely known tale in Westeros, and rumors claimed that not even marriage could put an end to their relationship. Ashara Dayne was the only woman who could break through the walls of a man renowned across Westeros for his honor and respected for it. A woman who lay with a married man should rightfully be scorned, but the romantic tale of the Silent Wolf and the Fallen Star was on the lips of many young girls. Even her little granddaughter, Margaery, loved listening to the story. But as long as Ashara Dayne lived, Janna becoming the Lady of Winterfell seemed unlikely. Maybe an assassination. It was possible. Maybe it would succeed. But if the assassin's trail led back to House Tyrell, it would be a disaster. Any such attempt would require extreme caution. Assassination was the easy answer, likely the approach Tywin Lannister would take. Olenna would bet her last teeth that the old lion was already making plans. The Lannisters were better at assassinations than the Tyrells and would likely try. So why should Olenna bother? She picked up her quill and parchment, ready to wield her true expertise, politics. Olenna began drafting her letters carefully, her mind as sharp as ever. The first letter was addressed to Eddard Stark, a proposal of betrothal for her daughter Janna. She played to the North's needs, offering generous shipments of grain and other provisions. Olenna also pledged aid for the Night's Watch and promised discounted prices for goods in the future. If Eddard Stark truly valued the North's interests over his own desires, he would at least consider the proposal. The second letter was sent to Jon Arryn. Olenna explained how a marriage alliance between the Reach and the North would unite the realm and foster stability. She emphasized how such a union would eliminate suspicions about House Tyrell's loyalty. Jon Arryn, a man devoted to the kingdom's stability, was deeply respected by Eddard Stark as a foster father. If anyone could influence the Northern Lord, it was him. The third letter was sent to Doran Martell. Olenna subtly highlighted the potential complications of having a Dane as the Lady of Winterfell, planting seeds of doubt in his mind. How could he guarantee that the Danes would fully commit to a Targaryen restoration? Eddard Stark was deeply loyal to his friend Robert Baratheon. Despite everything, there was always a possibility that he might raise his banners for the Baratheons once again. If that were to happen, what would the Danes do? Olenna did not provide direct accusations or threats. Instead, she left these doubts to fester, wrapped in polite and carefully chosen words that encouraged Doran to consider the potential risks. The fourth letter was addressed to Tywin Lannister. It contained a marriage proposal between the only eligible woman currently in House Lannister, Mercia Lannister, and Olenna's eldest grandson, Willers Tyrell. This offer gave Tywin a way to save face and step back gracefully. Olenna also included a polite request for a response within no more than 5 months, stating that if no answer was received by then, she would begin considering other candidates. By imposing this time limit, Olenna placed Tywin under considerable pressure. If the old lion failed to make strategic moves in the coming months, he stood to lose not only the position of Lady of Winterfell but also the title of Lady of Highgarden for his house. That would surely drive him mad. Olenna allowed herself a moment of satisfaction as she imagined how furious Tywin would become. A sly smile spread across her face. The fifth and final letter was addressed to Hoster Tully. Olenna expressed her condolences for the loss of his daughter while skillfully planting a few more seeds of doubt. How certain was Lord Tully that his grandson Robb would one day become the Lord of Winterfell? Eddard Stark was undoubtedly deeply in love with his potential bride, a woman hailing from Dorne, known for their cunning and manipulation. Ashera Dayne might very well desire for her own children to inherit Winterfell and could take steps to ensure it. Furthermore, rumors abounded that Jon Snow, Ned Stark's bastard, was Ashera Dayne's child. If this marriage came to pass, Jon Snow might be legitimized, and his age was perilously close to Robb's. This could present a direct threat to Robb's claim to Winterfell. Olenna did not spell out her accusations outright but used carefully crafted language, subtly implying these risks to Hoster Tully. The words were intended to provoke concern while maintaining an air of respect and sincerity. Satisfied, Olenna rose and handed the letters to Maester Lomis, instructing him to ensure their swift delivery. She poured herself a cup of Arbergold and walked down the corridor to see her granddaughter, Margaery. The chessboard is set, and I am a master of this game, Olenna thought as she moved gracefully through the halls. Now, let's see what you all will do. Win or lose, I intend to enjoy every moment of this game. Chapter 13, Riverrun. Chapter text. Ned cursed under his breath, "Damn you, Olenna Tyrell. You've really stirred up trouble this time." He looked at the two older men seated across from him, Hoster and Brynden Tully. The first was known for his political acumen, the second for his military prowess. The Tully family seemed to have been blessed with a knack for producing capable leaders. "We want to discuss your future marriage," Ned Hoster began. Ned's fists clenched as he snapped back, "How far do your political ambitions stretch, Lord Tully? Your daughter passed away barely a month ago, and you're already intent on profiting from her death." Hoster's face flushed red with a mix of anger and shame, but before he could retort, his brother Brynden interjected. Look, Ned, we know this is a difficult conversation. It's not easy for us either. But you won't be staying in Riverrun much longer, and we must address this. With all due respect, Ned replied firmly, the future Lady of Winterfell is my decision alone. I may take your advice, but I am not bound to heed it. Fair enough, Hoster said, waving his hand dismissively. Our concern lies with the safety of my grandson Robb. Robb will be the future Lord of Winterfell. I've assured you of this time and again. Yes, you have, Hoster acknowledged. But to be honest, I'm not entirely at ease with it, especially considering the prospect of you marrying a Dornish woman. Ashura would never harm my children, Ned said firmly. And why are you so certain of that? Ashura Dane is a woman who did not shy away from lying with a married man, Hoster said disdainfully. Let me remind you, my lord, Ned replied, his voice resolute. When I first met Ashura, I was a second son with no inheritance. On the other hand, she was the heir to Starfall. Ashura does not care for titles or power, she does not chase after them. I understand, Brynden interjected quickly. But we need absolute assurances for Robb's safety. And how exactly do you plan to obtain those assurances? Ned asked, his tone laced with sarcasm. Do you think Robb will be safer if I marry Mercia Lannister or Janna Tyrell? Both men visibly tensed at the question. No one with any sense would wager on that. Are you even considering their proposals? Brynden asked cautiously. Ned paused for a moment. The Lannister offer came with vast wealth and trade connections, resources he could use to strengthen the North quickly. For 5 years, his plans had progressed at an impressive pace thanks to the 300,000 gold Robert had granted him. However, Tywin Lannister could never be trusted. The man always sought the best for his house, and there was no doubt he would try to exert control over the North through his grandchildren. Moreover, it was highly likely Tywin had already sent assassins after Ashura. Olenna Tyrell's proposal, on the other hand, was far more cunning. Truth be told, she had backed Ned into a corner. Even Jon Arryn thought he should accept the offer, and some northern lords were dazzled by the sheer abundance of the proposed dowry. Just the day before, Lord Marndaly had spoken to him, attempting to persuade him to agree. Ned couldn't help but chuckle to himself. Typically, engagement terms and dowry proposals were kept private between the two houses, but the Queen of Thorns had announced her offer publicly, ensuring that the Northern Lords were well aware. While the Northern Lord's loyalty to the Starks would not waver due to his marital decisions, the number of bannermen trying to sway him was far from small. Olenna Tyrell, Ned thought for a moment. Clever woman. If she were in her 20s, I wouldn't hesitate to marry her. The dowry offered was truly generous, and Ned couldn't deny he was momentarily tempted. But the contents of the proposal and its promises weren't what Eddard Stark wanted, in fact, they were precisely what he sought to avoid. For years, Ned had been developing a plan for agricultural reform in the North, investing significant gold and effort into it. The project had made gradual progress. Though crops suited for the North's harsh winters had yet to be discovered, agricultural engineers had identified what they needed, and new farming techniques were already being implemented across the North with promising results. If Ned accepted Olenna Tyrell's offer, the North could obtain grain from the Reach at lower costs. However, this would discourage the Northern Lords from supporting his agricultural reforms. Instead of experimenting with new farming methods and incurring expenses, they would gravitate toward the cheaper grain from the Reach. Ned's primary goal was to transform the North from an import-reliant kingdom into an export-driven one. Olenna's offer was beneficial in the short term but potentially disastrous in the long run. The food shortages during winter had been a curse for thousands of years. Families often starved to death during harsh winters. Relying on grain from the Reach was a temporary solution. The North needed to solve this problem independently. No, Ned finally declared firmly. I will not accept their offers. Both older men leaned back in relief at his decision. Very well, Hoster said. Still, my grandson's safety must be ensured somehow. What do you want? Ned asked, irritation evident in his tone. Any children you have with Ashura Dane must come after all of my Catelyn's children in the line of succession, Hoster said. Even if you have a son with her, he will not be considered Robb's heir. Until Robb has children of his own, Sansa will remain his heir. Ned considered the proposal for a moment. To be honest, it wasn't entirely reasonable. While Northern culture respected women, the head of House Stark had never been a woman. No Northern lord would accept Sansa as their leader while a living Stark male existed. Agreed, he said nonetheless. It shouldn't pose much of an issue. Robb was a healthy child, and Ned had other plans for any children he might have with Ashera. Edric would inherit Starfall. Illyria could be married off to a suitable man in the south. Their true parentage would be revealed to them later. As the north grew stronger, Ned would need more capable lords. The children he had with Ashera could be groomed for such positions. Truth be told, Ned would need many sons, but with Ashera by his side, it shouldn't be a problem. There's one more matter, Brynden said. Your bastard, Jon Snow, his mother, is she really Ashera Dayne? That boy, Ned said through gritted teeth. He is of my blood. You can legitimize him, Hoster said, taking Ned's response as an approval. But he must always remain last in the line of succession, behind my grandchildren from Catelyn, your children from Ashera, and even Benjen's future children. Agreed, Ned said without much resistance. At the moment, he had no intention of legitimizing Jon. Even if he did, Jon would never be his heir. The man who strengthened and transformed the North was Eddard Stark. Naturally, the future lords of Winterfell should descend from him. I want Brynden to serve as the Master-at-Arms of Winterfell, Hoster added. This way, he can personally ensure the safety of Robb and Ed Muir. Ned's face darkened at the suggestion. I'm offering him my hand, and now he wants the whole arm. I cannot agree to that, he replied firmly. The Castle family has served as Winterfell's Master-at-Arms for generations. Stripping them of that honor without cause would insult one of my most loyal bannermen. I don't need to be Master-at-Arms, Brynden interjected. Just create a suitable position for me. I only require authority to act. Additionally, I can train all the Stark children, including those you have with Ashera, in warfare and combat. That's a reasonable offer, Ned thought. Agreed, he said after a moment of consideration. Is there anything else? No, that's all, Hoster said, clearly satisfied. Ned stood up and left the room. The coming months would be difficult. First and foremost, he needed to secure Ashera's safety, who was at risk of assassination. Especially during her journey north, she could face many dangers, and Ned was determined to prevent that. He would need to establish a safe route for the woman he loved, send his best men to protect her, and seek the help of a few lords. Then there was the matter of his late wife, Catelyn Tully. The last time he saw her, she was healthy. It didn't make sense to Ned that she had died from childbed fever, but then again, the same had happened to his mother, Lyra. She had been healthy and active, but after Benjen's birth, she had died from childbed fever. Even so, Ned decided to take the matter seriously. Since becoming the Lord of Winterfell, he had always been cautious about spies and assassins infiltrating the castle. If one had managed to elude him and was responsible for killing the Lady of Winterfell, Ned would find them, interrogate them, and eliminate them, no matter the cost. The Trout is convinced, Ned thought as he walked down the corridor. Now I need to deal with the old falcon. Chapter 14, Oberyn Martell. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Lady Dayne, the muscular Northman said, bowing respectfully. I am Jory Castle, the Master-at-Arms of Winterfell. Lord Stark has sent me to accompany you on your journey to Winterfell. Oberyn Martell raised an eyebrow. Sending his Master-at-Arms to guard her personally. Eddard Stark certainly wasn't taking this lightly. He glanced at Ashera, whose face held a proud expression. After Catelyn Tully's death, she had been kept under incredibly strict protection in Sunspear for 5 months. The most trusted guards were stationed by her side at all times, and even her food and water were thoroughly inspected. Initially, Oberyn had thought his brother Doran was overreacting, but it turned out the danger was all too real. Despite all the tight security, Ashera had faced assassination attempts 2 or 3 times a week. Oberyn inspected the group of Northerners before him. 14 men in total. 9 of them were strong and muscular, clearly seasoned Northern warriors. 1 was a rather wiry Cranogman, and the remaining 4. They wore leather armor adorned with skull motifs, and, in Oberyn's opinion, not all of that leather came from animals. The leader of the group was a goat-bearded man with a cheerful face, but Oberyn couldn't deny the chill running down his spine. Oberyn couldn't help but ask, "Would you mind explaining a bit about the group you've brought along? The 9 men with me are some of the toughest and most loyal in the north. As for the other 4..." Jory Castle grimaced in distaste. "They are former Bolton men who have sworn loyalty to House Stark. Their leader is known as Locke. But don't worry, Prince Oberyn, you needn't concern yourself with them. They'll only be traveling with us temporarily and will part ways with the group later. They have business to attend to in King's Landing." "And what sort of business might that be?" Oberyn asked. "A final service to the late Lady Stark," Jory replied, refusing to elaborate further. "And the Cranogman?" Ashura asked. "He doesn't seem much like a fighter." "You're right," Jory nodded. "That man is Morgan Blackmire, one of House Reed's vassals. His role is to stay by your side at all times and ensure your escape in case of a serious conflict. While he may not look it, Morgan is an incredibly swift warrior and, as a Cranogman, is highly skilled in the arts of stealth. Eddard Stark didn't just send men, he also carefully planned for every contingency," Oberyn realized. "All right," Oberyn said, waving his hand dismissively. "Now, I believe it's time you shared the secret travel route you've so carefully hidden." "Unfortunately, my lord," Jory replied, "we only share that information with the important individuals traveling with us." "I'm coming with you," Oberyn declared, gesturing to the 30 men behind him, among them one of his so-called sand snakes, Elia Sand, also known as Rhaenys. She had insisted on coming to Winterfell to see her brother, Maker. "Maker?" Oberyn paused in thought. "Ashura didn't reveal his existence to us until the very last moment because she knew that if Doran found out, he wouldn't have bothered with Lady Catelyn. Instead, he would have tried to bind Ned Stark to the Targaryen restoration through threats and marriage." "Clever woman." Hearing this, Jory handed Oberyn a map and instructions without much resistance. Oberyn carefully examined the map. https://.postim.cc/1ZCBDHFJ/20250107-00902-0000.png. Let me see. From Sunspear to Estermont Island. The Estermonts are Robert Baratheon's maternal relatives, and judging by the fact they are sending 3 ships, they are taking Ashura's protection seriously. After that, we'll head to Tarth Island and Massey's Hook. I've heard Lord Stark gets along well with Selwyn Tarth, and Justin Massey is known as a loyal supporter of Stannis. Then, we'll travel to Dragonstone. It seems Eddard Stark made a personal request to Stannis, meaning we'll be protected by the royal fleet. Following that, we'll stop at Celtigar Island. Since the Celtigars are known Targaryen loyalists, they'll ensure Ashura's safety, as she's critical to their plans. I should send a letter to Doran about this. After Celtigar, we'll dock at Runestone, home of House Royce, loyal friends of the Starks. Normally, we would head to Gulltown, but the city is overcrowded, rife with opportunities for assassination, and far from safe. From Runestone, we'll ride to the Gates of the Moon. This part of the journey could be dangerous due to the mountain clans, but Lord Yohn Royce will be traveling with us all the way to the north, so it shouldn't be much trouble. When we finish with the Vale, we will reach the reed swamps. This move will likely catch Tywin Lannister off guard, he was probably expecting us to travel all the way to White Harbor by ship. At that point, we will officially enter the north. From there, the rest of the journey should proceed smoothly. There are strict orders to keep everyone except the most trusted men away from Ashura Dane. Every risk factor has been minimized, and it's clear how necessary this level of caution is. Tywin Lannister delayed accepting Olenna Tyrell's marriage proposal, and now that the opportunity has presented itself, he will strike like an enraged bull. "Very well," he said at last, nodding. "How many men will we be traveling with?" "With your men included, a total of 40," Jory replied, "but we will be receiving reinforcements from other houses throughout the journey." "May I ask who else will be traveling with us?" Of course," Oberyn said, gesturing behind him. "Ashura Dane, as you're all well aware. The young girl beside her is her sister, Illyria Dane. Lady Lonna Dane and her son, Edric Dane, who she holds in her arms, will also join us. Lord Alaric will remain at Starfall. The soldiers you see behind me are loyal men from House Dane and House Martell. My bastard daughters, Obera, Nymeria, Tyan, and Elia, will also ride with us. Jory let out a quiet sigh at the sight of the large group of passengers but nodded without much protest. He seemed to think the journey would take far longer than necessary with this many travelers, but he didn't want to risk souring relations with the future Lady Stark, whom he had only just met. We will set sail in 3 days, once the weather calms. I've received strict orders from Lord Stark regarding this journey, such as never setting sail in stormy weather, and I will follow those orders to the letter if we encounter any critical moments. I trust there will be no stubbornness on your part during the trip. Oberyn simply nodded, glancing at the northern men in the group behind Jory while licking his lips. Personally, he preferred the beautiful men of Lys, but experiencing the rugged and muscular men of the north could certainly prove to be an interesting change of pace. Oberyn, Ashura said as she grabbed his arm. We need to talk. Oberyn turned to her calmly. Yes, what is it? I want to know how you killed Lady Catelyn Tully, Ashura said bluntly. I've asked Doran several times, but he refuses to tell me. Catelyn Tully. Oberyn raised an eyebrow. She always calls her Tully, never Stark. Well, I suppose there's no harm in telling you now, Oberyn said. Dorne has long sponsored talented acolytes trained in Old Town, allowing us to secure skilled maesters for our houses. Some of them were Northmen. After Doran spoke with you, he selected one of them and sent him to Winterfell as an apprentice to Maester Lewyn. Northmen are usually fiercely loyal to House Stark, Ashura said, surprised. You found a traitor among them. Well, people are ambitious, Oberyn said with a shrug. But the acolyte was a proud Northman and loyal to House Stark. Otherwise, he wouldn't have made it past Winterfell's security. You know how tightly it's guarded against spies, even various struggles to infiltrate it. If he was loyal, why did he kill Lady Stark? Ashura pressed. Loyalty can be interpreted in different ways, Oberyn explained. The acolyte, Valen, I think that was his name, believed that with Lady Stark out of the way, Lord Stark could marry the woman he truly loved, which would be better for the North and House Stark. How did the assassination happen? Lord Stark was away dealing with the Greyjoy rebellion, and Lady Catelyn was about to give birth. After the birth, Valen laced Lady Stark's medicine with winter roses. Normally, winter roses aren't poisonous, but they can make people slightly ill. If given to a woman who's just given birth, it could trigger postpartum fever. How did he receive the order? Ashura asked, concerned. We hung a red cloak at the top of the broken tower. It was a pre-arranged signal, Oberyn said. Don't worry, Ashura. Doran cleaned up all traces meticulously. Eddard Stark trusts Valen and sees him as a future maester for Winterfell. There will be no problems. Very well, Ashura said, turning away, visibly relieved. Acolyte Valen, huh? I'll remember that name. Hey, Oberyn said, grabbing her arm. Doesn't it bother you that your children are placed last in the line of succession? Not really, Ashura replied with a shrug, a sly smile on her face. The important thing is that we have plenty of children. Good, Oberyn said approvingly. We'll need Robb Stark alive if we want the Tullys to join the Restoration. What are you implying? Ashura asked, her voice sharp. Nothing, Oberyn said quickly, raising his hands in mock surrender. I just mean, you hated Catelyn Tully, and the children are hers. They're Ned's children, Ashura said firmly. I would never harm Ned's children, or any child. I'm not a Lannister. I know, Oberyn said, backing off. I spoke too freely, all right. My apologies. What about Jon Snow? The Trout Whore was a devout follower of the Seven, Ashura said disdainfully. She probably treated the poor boy terribly. I'll tell him I'm his mother and raise him as a prince should be raised. You're going to lie to him? Oberyn asked, surprised. Yes, Ashura admitted. That way, I can mold him into what he should be. He won't turn out mad like his grandfather or father, and even after he learns the truth, he'll still see me as his mother. I'll be a far better mother than that spoiled she-wolf whore ever was. Don't you think so? Oberyn couldn't argue with that. He would rather be the child of a couple like Ned and Ashura, who were bound by love, than the product of a foolish, war-starting affair like Rhaegar and Lyanna. He suspected many others would feel the same way, including the boy himself. "All right," he said at last. "We leave in 3 days. Be ready." As Ashura walked away, a satisfied smile on her face, Oberyn watched her go. He couldn't help but smirk, wondering if Eddard Stark would have any energy left to rule the North after Ashura was done wearing him out in their marital bed. Notes: I've uploaded the map of Ashura's travel route to the chapter, but it may not be visible to everyone. For those who wish to view the map, I'm leaving a direct link below. https://postimp.cc/kkttkt7p. Don't forget to leave kudos. Chapter 15, Locke. Summary. This chapter contains themes of violence. If you are sensitive to such content, please refrain from reading. To be honest, I wrote this chapter because I truly despise Petyr Baelish. It's more of a side story in tone. Chapter text. Locke looked at the man sobbing on his knees before him. "Please, please," Petyr Baelish begged, tears streaming down his face. "I'll do anything, just don't touch me, let me go." "Look, dear Petyr," Locke said, stroking the man's face with a broad grin, "I'm sure you already know this as the Master of Coin, but having a right-hand man is important. They take care of all the unnecessary trouble for you." He gestured toward the skull-masked man behind him. "Saemon is my right-hand man." "Who's yours?" Petyr Baelish said nothing, only sobbing harder. "Fuck," Locke said, looking at the bloody mace in his hand. "Was that the guy I killed?" He turned to Saemon and pointed at the shattered body on the ground. "What was his name?" "Lothar Brune." "Lothar Brune," Locke murmured. "See. This is why Saemon's my right-hand man. He takes care of the unnecessary stuff for me, like remembering names and all that." He looked down at the body. "Ah, I really killed him in a nasty way, didn't I?" The guy screamed like a woman. He placed hand on Petyr's shoulder. "Sorry, buddy. If I'd known he was your right-hand man, I would have made it a bit quicker, but just a bit." Petyr continued sobbing uncontrollably. "What a bore," Locke thought with a sigh. "My new master rarely lets me hunt. I wish this one had a little fight in him, or maybe was a woman." "Hey, Saemon," Locke called out, "this guy had a Valyrian steel dagger on him, didn't he?" "Yes," Saemon confirmed. "Give it to me," Locke ordered, taking the dagger. Locke looked at the Valyrian steel dagger in his hands with admiration. "My old master loved this dagger, it's a shame it's been collecting dust on a wall. Maybe my new master will let me use it. I'll have some fun with this man," Locke said as he grabbed Petyr by the shoulder and hoisted him into the air. "You can play with the other one. What's his name again?" "Oswell Kettle Black." "Whatever," Locke said, setting Petyr onto the back of the horse and sliding the dagger into his belt. Then he climbed onto the horse and began riding toward the woods. He could see the man behind him staring at the dagger on his belt. The man's hands weren't tied, he could have reached for it and stabbed Locke with it. Or at least, that's what he must have been thinking. But he did nothing. "Ah, Petyr, I know men like you. In fact, we are the same," Locke said with a sigh. "We have different tastes from normal people, but those bastards misunderstand us. Instead of respecting our differences, they try to hunt us down. It's a shitty world, isn't it?" He raised his hands theatrically. "But there's a big difference between you and me. I handle my own business. You, on the other hand, use pawns like Lysa Arryn or Lothar Brune. Oh, I'm sure you have all sorts of excuses for it, telling yourself you're some sort of tactical genius." He turned to look back at Petyr. "How about, for once in your life, you handle your own business like a real man?" Petyr Baelish seemed emboldened by those words. He quickly reached for the dagger, but Locke didn't let him complete the move. He headbutted the Master of Coin with enough force to break his nose, knocking him off the horse. "For the love of the old gods, they told me this man was supposed to be clever," Locke thought, laughing as he looked down at Petyr. Locke grabbed him off the ground and threw him back onto the horse. "I hope I don't have to do that again. Honestly, for size, you're pretty heavy." He smacked the sobbing man's face again, but this time nothing broke, and the man didn't fall. "He's learning," Locke thought cheerfully. After a while, Locke saw a rabbit deep in the forest. "Wait here, my new friend." I'll be back soon, he said as he dismounted and silently crawled toward the rabbit, keeping an eye on the man behind him. His feet weren't bound, but he made no attempt to escape. Locke lunged at the rabbit and caught it with his bare hands. Ha! Looks like I haven't lost my agility, he said, lifting the rabbit into the air for Petter to see. Then, as he walked toward the man, he suddenly started smashing the small animal against a tree. He didn't stop until there was almost nothing left of the rabbit's flesh, and the tree bark was stained red. Ah, my apologies, Locke said with a smile, tossing the mangled remains aside. Did it remind you of someone you knew? Petter said nothing, staring at the ground. Look, Petter, I need you to understand something, Locke said as he approached his horse, pointing at the man. You belong to me. He pointed to the path they had come. Those men over there belong to me too. He drew the new dagger from his back and showed it to the trembling man. This also belongs to me. He mounted his horse. Actually, you should be happy about this, Petter. New beginnings are always nice. He looked at the man behind him as he urged the horse forward. How about a new name to celebrate this fresh start? Let me think. Ah, I've got it. Reek. That's going to be your new name. Do you like it? He examined the man's sour expression. Don't worry, I'll make sure you like it, and then I'll call you that. As he continued riding, the man behind him started crying again. Ah, how boring, Locke sighed. Come on, Petter, stop crying so much, he finally said. You should have known this was how it would end. I mean, you were walking around bragging about how you fucked the late Lady Catelyn, rest her soul, right? You know Lord Stark, honorable guy and all that, but he's no fool. I've put a lot of effort into getting you out of the city, Petter, Locke said with genuine regret. I even missed the new Lady Stark's wedding because of it. And you know, that really pissed me off because I love weddings. All that food, alcohol, dancing girls. He sighed. We don't get to see that much at the Dread Fort. They rode for another 5 minutes in silence, Locke allowing Petter a brief moment of peace, a small gesture of mercy. All right, we're here, Locke finally announced as he stopped the horse. Look, Petter, this must hurt a lot. You thought you were the king of the realm, and now you've seen your most loyal man torn to shreds in front of you. The other one? Well, they are flaying him right now. Locke roughly dragged Petter off the horse and kicked him to the ground. He pointed to tracks on the forest floor. See that? Bear tracks. We're right in the middle of their path. Ignoring Petter's pleas, Locke tied him to a tree. Serving Lord Starker is a strange feeling, you know, he said, silencing Littlefinger with a punch. I enjoy myself much less than I used to, but when I do enjoy myself. He licked his lips in satisfaction. I deal with bastards like you. It gives me a strange sense of justice. He took off his bag and began preparing his equipment. You're kidnapping little girls from Flea Bottom, and force them to work in brothels, chained up, don't you? He took out the surgical knives from his bag and checked their sharpness. Don't get me wrong, I'm not doing any of this for justice. Personally, I'm just having fun. Now, we're going to play a game. I'm sure you know what this is, he said, pulling out the hourglass from his pocket and showing it to the man crying, tied to the tree. I'll turn this 5 times, meaning you'll have to stay silent and endure for just 5 minutes. If you make a sound, he paused for a moment, looking at the man. Like I said, this is a road actively used by bears, so you'll attract them. I could escape, but you, well, he shrugged. He watched with pleasure for a while as the man, tied to the tree, flailed and silently begged, constantly promising large sums of money and rewards. Do you know I'm about to be the new Lord Bloodall? That's the reward for finishing your job. Actually, it's quite a funny story, he said, fiddling with the hourglass in his hand. It seems the Bloodall lands are on the shores of the Saltspear Sea. They've been preventing Ironborn from raiding the area and attacking Barrowton. In the end, the godless will be dealt with by the faithless, he said, driving his knife into the tree bark right next to Littlefinger. After the destruction of House Bloodall, I heard Lord Benjen has been having constant trouble. He has to patrol Saltspear with his men, yet some Ironborn still escape and attack the surrounding villages. In short, Lord Stark needs a new Erd Bloodall, he said, pointing to himself with another dagger. So, as you can see, I'm the one to take over. Thankfully, the late Lord's sister is still alive and unmarried. How lucky am I, huh? He flipped the hourglass over and set it on the ground, leaning against a nearby tree. Well, time is ticking away, Locke said, showing the hourglass. Now, let's see, Petter. I want to play a little game. Shout Imric, as loudly as you can. If I'm satisfied with the volume of your voice, I'll give you a short break, but be careful. He grinned. After all, we're in the middle of a bare path. Locke slashed at Petter's clothing with a single swift movement, tearing it open, exposing the man's chest. He looked down at the man who was desperately trying to hold back his cries. All right, new friend, Locke said, picking up the surgical blade, ready to begin. Let's get started. Chapter 16, Ashura Stark. Summary. 8 years after Robert's rebellion. This chapter focuses more on the inner dynamics of the Stark family, but there is also good news for the North. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Ashura woke up in the arms of the man she loved. Just like every other day. 7 hells, how do you Northerners wake up this early? You're all demons, she said with a sigh, looking at Ned as he got out of bed. Ned only gave her a gentle smile and kissed her forehead. You keep resting. Don't push yourself too much, Ashura. You're pregnant, he said lovingly. Ashura cupped Ned's face in her hands and kissed his lips as she gently stroked her slightly swollen belly with gratitude. They had been married for nearly 3 years, and this was her second pregnancy. It hadn't taken long for Ashura to conceive again after the birth of their first official child, Argilac Stark. Initially, Ned hadn't wanted to rush into having a second child and had been concerned about Ashura's health, but she had no health issues, and the Stark pack needed new cubs. For a moment, Ashura thought of her eldest son, Edric. After their wedding, he had returned to Starfall. As a mother, being separated from her child had been an agony for Ashura, but she found comfort in knowing that Lonna loved Edric as if he were her own and would raise him like a mother. Additionally, when Edric turned 8, he would be sent to Winterfell as a ward. Illyria had stayed in Winterfell with Ashura and had long been acting as an older sister to her step-siblings, but Ashura had yet to tell her the truth about who her real parents were. The time was approaching, and Ashura feared how her daughter would react to this long-hidden lie. Unfortunately, I have to get up, she said, getting out of bed and dressing. Because your little wolves wake up just as early as you do. Every day, Ashura and Ned would wake up, get dressed, and then go their separate ways, Ned to oversee the morning patrols, and Ashura to look after the children. Later, the entire family would gather for breakfast. It seemed like a monotonous life, but Ashura never grew bored, she could live every day like this. As she walked down the corridor, she first headed toward the nursery to check on Argilac. But as she turned the corner, a small, energetic figure crashed into her leg and fell to the floor. Arya, she exclaimed, kneeling down to check the child. Once she was sure Arya wasn't hurt, she couldn't help but scold her. I told you not to run in the corridors. I'm sorry, Mother, Arya said, pouting sadly. Ashura sighed. She felt like she wasn't a good mother to Arya, unable to discipline her properly. Whenever she tried to scold Arya, the little girl would look at her with Ned's eyes and call her mother, and Ashura would feel her anger dissolve like grains of sand. Since coming to Winterfell, this little girl who never stopped moving, never tired, and terrorized the entire castle had become Ashura's favorite. When Arya called her mother for the first time, Ashura had cried tears of joy. All right, she finally said as she sent Arya on her way, but don't let it happen again, or I'll talk to your father. Ashura found it difficult to scold Arya, so Ned often took on that role for her. After all, that's what husbands and wives were for. She continued walking down the corridor and entered the nursery. She checked on Argilac's health. Normally, this would be the task of Acolyte Valen, but he had passed away in an accident a few months after Ashura arrived in Winterfell. Ashura knew she owed her current happiness to that man, but his loyalty was questionable, and she couldn't allow someone like him to linger around her family. She asked the nurses if the baby had been awake all night. Fortunately, Argilac was probably one of the healthiest babies ever born in Winterfell. He had inherited Ashura's jet black hair and violet eyes, but his features resembled Ned's more. Like his father, he was quiet, a silent wolf, and always woke up very early in the morning. Ashura played with her son for a while until a servant entered the room and said, "My lady, Lord Stark is calling you to breakfast." She then took the baby in her arms and headed toward the main hall of Winterfell for breakfast. Lady Stark, Sansa said shyly, "I made this for you," and handed Ashura the knitted piece in her hands. As Ashura examined the piece, she had to admit that the girl was talented. A star was gliding on a purple background, with the Stark sigil beneath it. "It's wonderful," dear Ashura said to Sansa. "I'm sure it will look amazing on Argilac." The girl nodded happily and turned back to Illyria, but Ashura couldn't help but watch her. Getting used to Sansa was truly a difficult trial for Ashura. It was easy to see Stark in Robb and Arya, but no matter how much Ashura looked at Sansa, she couldn't find a single drop of Stark in her. The little girl had inherited almost all of her features from her mother, Catelyn Tully, the woman who had stolen Ned from her. This didn't mean Ashura treated Sansa badly. She was always as kind as she could be, but she tried to keep her distance from the girl, fearing she might say something hurtful in a moment of impulse. Fortunately, Sansa was too young to notice the formal tone Ashura used with her, but Illyria understood and had argued with Ashura about it. "She's not from the north," Ashura thought, gazing at the red-haired, sweet girl. "We should send her to Tully or Tyrell as a ward." Ashura couldn't help but sigh. Every time they discussed this with Ned, her husband would strongly object. He said Sansa couldn't be sent south, as she was Robb's heir. Robb, to be fair, was a Stark who had taken the Tully colors. He would bear his father's position well, but Sansa, as his heir, was incredibly irrelevant. No Northern Lord would take her seriously. Arya, maybe, but not Sansa. Realistically, Robb's only true heir was the tiny Argilac in his arms. The girl worshipped the Seven. A Stark who worships the Seven. Northern Lords would never accept such a leader. Ashura considered doing something about it, but as a worshipper of the Seven herself, she couldn't guide a young girl to the old gods. "We need to marry Robb off as soon as possible and ensure he has children," Ashura thought. "I should check the suitors. Maybe Rhaenys. It would be a great way to form an alliance." "Mother," a voice called, and Ashura turned. Jon Snow, another child with no blood relation, but unlike Arya, this child truly believed himself to be Ashura's son. "Yes, my son, what is it?" she asked, patting the 8-year-old's head. When Jon had first been told he was her son, the little boy had cried with joy and hugged Ashura. Ashura felt guilty for telling such a big lie to a child, but it was better than growing up without a mother. She couldn't even imagine how he would react when he learned the truth. Ashura's feelings about Jon were complicated. His birth had come as a result of a rebellion, the same rebellion in which Elia and Aegon had been brutally murdered. But it wasn't his fault. She kept reminding herself that children are innocent of their parents' sins. The anger that built up in her heart towards this boy, who looked so much like Ned, made Ashura's conscience ache. "My father called for you," the boy said, keeping his silent expression as Ashura continued to stroke his head, though it was clear he was pleased by the news. "Ned called for me in the middle of the day." Ashura wondered. Eddard Stark was a wonderful lover at night, but during the day he was an extremely busy, work-focused man, and he rarely made exceptions. After securing the mines from the northern mountain tribes, he had begun selling them, increasing the flow of gold from the north more than ever before. The Marndale family is loyal, but White Harbor shouldn't be the only trading port on the east coast, Ashura remembered Ned saying. "I'm thinking of Widow's Watch as a new port, but I should speak to the Flint family first. Also, if we do this, we'll need to build a new port and roads, which will be expensive. As a more viable alternative, my grandmother's castle, Old Castle, which belongs to the Locke family, is close to White Harbor, but it might upset the Marndales, as it takes trade from them. This is something I'll need to consider carefully." "All right," Ashura said, handing Jon the baby in her lap. "While I'm gone, could you look after Argilac? Take him to old Nan." She motioned to the servant behind her to follow the children to ensure nothing would happen, but she didn't anticipate any problems. Jon was carefully holding his full-blooded sibling. Ashura moved toward the solar where her husband was. She nodded to Jory Castle, who was standing guard at the door. "My lady," Jory said, bowing respectfully. "Lord Stark has been waiting for you, and by the way, I have a special request." "Yes, what is it?" Ashura asked. If, inside, you and Lord Stark, do something. Jory blushed in embarrassment. Please let me know before you do. I keep hearing too many sounds from that side, but since I'm not allowed to leave the door without orders, I must wait here. Ashura blushed in embarrassment, murmuring a few words of approval, then quickly entered the Lord Solar. Ned, she said to the man sitting at the table. You called for me. Yes, Ned said with a grin, quickly standing up, wrapping Ashura in a tight embrace, and kissing her deeply. Ashura was surprised by his reaction. There was no lack of passion in their relationship, but Ned was a man who took his duties seriously and knew how to control himself during the day. What's made my husband so happy? She asked curiously. The crop rotation plan, Ned said, his eyes scanning Ashura as he spoke. It worked. We found the right product. Really? Ashura asked in surprise. Yes, it's rice, Ned said as he began to kiss Ashura's neck. It only grows in the marshes, but it's said to be suitable for cultivation in the entire marsh, and it can last for years in storage without spoiling. He began to undress her. This will feed our people throughout the winter, and this is just the beginning. There's also a product called potatoes, and they say we can grow them all over the north. Ashura gasped softly as she looked at her husband in astonishment. This was indeed big news. Once rice and potatoes became common products in the north, the people would be better able to withstand the winter. This would undoubtedly lead to population growth. Ashura knew that Ned had worked long and hard on the crop rotation plan, pouring a lot of money into it. That's why, without resisting at all, she let him push everything on the table to the floor and sit her on it. Ashura thought, as her husband began kissing her chest. She pulled his head toward her, encouraging him as she moaned more. Why do I feel like I've forgotten something? Notes. Jory, oh my god. They've started again, and I have to stand by the door. I'm starting to hate my job. Aes Kingsguard, fuck off, man. Seriously, just fuck off. Chapter 17, Stony September. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. The square of Stony September had not been this crowded in years. Merchants, peasants, knights, and even a notable number of nobles stood packed together on the cobblestone ground, some clutching the holy star of the seven, others whispering silent prayers. The air was thick with anxious hope and simmering anger. Along the edges of the square, Boniface Hasty and his faithful hearts stood guard, their spears glinting in the light. Banners bearing the sacred symbols of the seven fluttered in the gentle breeze. At the very center of it all stood the High Sparrow, barefoot on the cold stone ground. His plain, knee-length white tunic set him apart from the finery of the gathered nobles. His gaze swept over the crowd, sharp and piercing, as though he could see into their very souls. Taking a deep breath, he began to speak, his voice carrying over the murmur of the square. Brothers and sisters, he called, his tone neither overly loud nor meek, yet each word seemed to find its mark among the throng. We gather here today not merely to recall our sins. No, today, we come together to unearth their roots. To stand against the injustice that festers across Westeros. The hum of the crowd stilled as all turned their attention to him. Tell me, why are we hungry? He asked, his voice rising with conviction. Why do our children go to bed with empty stomachs? Why do our lords drown in rivers of wine while we beg for a single drop of water? Is this the will of the gods? No, my brothers and sisters, this is the greed of men. This is the rot that poisons Westeros. A ripple of murmurs swept through the crowd as they exchanged glances and nods of agreement. The High Sparrow let the moment hang before stepping forward, his bare feet firm against the stone. Look to the north, he cried, his voice ringing out across the square. The Starks and their followers, worshippers of the old gods. They kneel before trees and stones, rejecting the light of the seven. These lost souls endure each bitter winter as a punishment for their defiance. But I promise them salvation, a path illuminated by the light of the seven. A stir ran through the crowd, whispers buzzing like bees. The High Sparrow pressed on without pause. Turn your eyes westward, he thundered. To the Greyjoys and their drowned god. These marauders drench the seas in blood, pillaging, raping, enslaving the innocent. They are an affront to our gods and to humanity itself. Their blasphemy is a poison that should have been purged long ago. At his words, Boniface Hasty's men struck their spears rhythmically against the ground, the sound echoing through the square like a war drum. It added weight to the High Sparrow's accusations. "Now, look to the east," he proclaimed, his voice growing louder. "Essos, land of corruption and false gods, gilded idols, stone deities, and the so-called Lord of Light. These twisted faiths uphold slavery and seek to taint our holy lands. Their blasphemies defile Andalos, the sacred land that birthed the faith of the Seven. Anyone who kneels to their false gods is damned in the eyes of the Seven." The murmurs of the crowd grew into rumblings of anger. Faces darkened with indignation, and fists clenched. The High Sparrow allowed their fury to simmer, his presence an anchor amidst the storm. "And to the south," he continued, his voice sharp as a blade. "To Dawn, where the heathen traditions of the Rhoynar still linger. These Dornishmen, with their false freedoms, twist the sacred teachings of the Seven. They allow the priests of Essos' cursed gods to infiltrate Westeros, and some among them secretly continue their worship of Mother Rhoynar. Their very existence is a dagger driven into the heart of the faith." The shouts of the crowd grew louder, their disdain for Dawn bubbling to the surface. The High Sparrow fed the flames with every word, knowing full well the power of collective outrage. "And now," he said, his voice hardening further, "we must speak of the Targaryens, our former rulers, cursed and broken. This vile house, who glorified incest and twisted it into a virtue. They lost their dragons, and so too must their bloodline fade. Yet, there are still noble families loyal to their shadow. Their loyalty deepens the wounds of Westeros, prolonging our suffering." At this, the crowd erupted. Jeers and curses filled the air as memories of Targaryen tyranny were stoked afresh. The faithful hearts braced themselves, shields raised to keep the surging masses contained, but the High Sparrow stood unmoved. "And let us not forget the man who sits upon the Iron Throne," he declared, his voice rising above the chaos. "Robert Baratheon, a king who drowns himself in wine and loses himself in the arms of whores. This man dares to call himself king, yet he does not bow to the gods. How can a man who scorns the Seven rule with justice? A king who disrespects his people disrespects the gods, and his rule is void in their eyes." This proclamation sent the crowd into a frenzy. Some shouted in anger, others in agreement. Stony September had a complicated history with Robert Baratheon. The townsfolk had once hidden him from his enemies, risking their lives for the man now being denounced. The tension in the air crackled like a storm. "But my brothers and sisters," the High Sparrow continued, softening his tone, "our path is not one of violence. Ours is a path of repentance and justice. United under the light of the Seven, we can bring these sinners to face divine judgment. The gods are merciful, but they do not tolerate injustice. And neither should we." He raised his hands skyward, his voice reverberating like a prayer. "Today, here in Stony September, let us ignite a flame. A flame of justice, a beacon of hope, a light that will guide Westeros back to righteousness. Together, we will fight for equality in the eyes of the gods. Together, we will build a kingdom of justice, faith, and honor." The crowd roared, their voices rising in a crescendo of prayers and shouts. "Justice! Faith! The Seven protect us," they cried, their fervor shaking the very air. The High Sparrow surveyed the sea of faces before him, his eyes alight with a holy fire. He knew that what had begun in this small square would spread across Westeros like wildfire. This was the first step in a revolution that would change the realm forever. Turning to Boniface Hasty, he spoke in a low but resolute voice. "Send the ravens. Spread the word to every corner of Westeros," he said. "The time has come to bring the light of the Seven back to this fractured land. Our crusade begins now." Notes. If you've read this far, you must be enjoying the fanfic, so don't forget to leave a kudos. Chapter 18, White Harbor. Summary. I recommend checking this map while reading the chapter, it will help you as a reader. https://www.reddit.com/r//comments/great_great_map_Westeros_for/whoever/. Chapter text. This is truly surprising, Eddard Stark thought as he read the paper in his hand. Recently, some rather intriguing developments had occurred in the south. After High Sparrow's famous sermon in Stony September, ravens had been sent all over the Seven Kingdoms. The letters, particularly those sent to Robert Baratheon, Doran Martell, Tywin Lannister, and Balon Greyjoy, were extremely harsh. Meanwhile, letters sent to Mace Tyrell and Jon Arryn were invitations to a new crusade. The letter that reached Eddard Stark, however, Ned honestly expected it to contain some nonsense accusing him of heresy, but the situation was quite different. In fact, the letter was written in an extremely polite tone and invited House Stark to embrace the faith of the Seven. Eddard Stark worshipped the gods of his ancestors, the old gods. However, if he were to be honest, he didn't have a profound loyalty to them. If the right conditions and environment were presented, he might seriously consider converting to the faith of the Seven. However, the circumstances required for that were truly extraordinary. If Ned were to accept this invitation, it would certainly plunge the North into civil war. The Northerners might be loyal to House Stark, but they had also worshipped the old gods for thousands of years. If Ned forced them to choose between the two, it would likely be an incredibly difficult decision. Eddard tried to imagine a religious war in the North in his mind. Marndael, Sewyn, Iron Smith, and Benjen would support Eddard. However, Karstark, Umber, and, unfortunately, Reed would likely spark an uprising. The actions of the other houses could only be speculated upon. For instance, the Mormonts were one of the most loyal houses to the Starks, but they had also worshipped the old gods for thousands of years. What would Mage Mormont do? Ned didn't know. Well, there's no need to dwell on such thoughts, Ned dismissed the matter. After all, I will never make such a decision. He looked at the plump man sitting before him. We truly live in interesting times, don't we, Lord Marndael? Indeed, my Lord Wyman Marndael confirmed. I assume you also received a raven. Yes, Wyman confirmed. A letter inviting us to join their crusade. I'm sure I don't need to say it, but House Marndael will follow House Stark, as always. Ned smiled faintly. The Marndaelis had been an important house in the Reach during the old days, when Westeros was divided into 7 kingdoms. They had started a civil war in the region, lost, and were exiled. Normally, such an exile would have led to the complete obliteration of a house, for a landless house was nothing. However, the Starks had protected and supported them, giving them the land once known as the Wolf's Den and helping them establish White Harbor. The Marndaelis had never forgotten that help. Despite managing the North's only rival free trade port for thousands of years, they had never shown anti-Stark political ambitions, unlike the Ryswells or the Boltons. Despite their good relations with the Targaryen dynasty, including briefly serving as Hand of the King and nearly sealing a marriage alliance, they had never hesitated to stand with the Starks during the rebellion. The Starks are always grateful for your loyalty, he said sincerely. I've been on the road for a few weeks, and to be honest, I haven't heard much about the South. Now, tell me, what's going on in the South? Ah, my lord, truly interesting things have transpired, Wyman Marndael said. It seems some noble houses have joined High Sparrow's revolution. Is that so? Ned asked with interest, though not surprise. Which houses? Vance, Hylton, Woad, Hayford, Footley. Wyman listed and then paused for emphasis. And went. Ned looked at the man in front of him thoughtfully. All of these houses were near Stony September. Hayford was dangerously close to King's Landing, and Robert needed to act immediately. But went. The house itself wasn't strong, but it held Harrenhal. Please, he said to Wyman. Don't tell me High Sparrow has retreated to Harrenhal. Unfortunately, the plump man shook his head. It seems he has retreated there with 3,000 soldiers. Eddard swore silently. Though Harrenhal had been a shadow of its former self since Aegon the Conqueror burned it, even the ruins of the cursed castle provided a formidable defensive position. If it were guarded by 3,000 men, an attack would require at least 10,000. Still, gathering 10,000 soldiers shouldn't be an issue. If the enemy were merely a house or a kingdom, Ned wouldn't be so concerned. But to go to war against a religion, against a faith, was something entirely different. It required a much more nuanced approach, otherwise, it could ignite troubles that would linger for centuries, troubling his descendants. That's not all, I assume, Ned said, looking at the man before him. Yes, Wyman confirmed. They've sent priests to various regions and cities. They are preaching to the common folk, and whenever someone tries to catch them, the same people protect them. Tracking them down is incredibly difficult. I've even heard that King's Landing is on the brink of a civil uprising. That's the real problem, Eddard sighed. Tywin Lannister had a tendency to underestimate the common people, but if a real rebellion broke out, even the Red Keep could be overrun by the masses. A few thousand soldiers couldn't stand against hundreds of thousands of enraged civilians. Eddard had countless questions swirling in his mind, but he asked the most pressing one first: have they come to White Harbor? They have, Wyman confirmed.